hectic space today. I've got some crazy questions ready.
Same.
So I have two interesting announcements to make. I have one I'll make in a bit. Really exciting, not an announcement, but something that could happen that will make this an incredible space. And then second is an announcement that I forgot. So I forgot. Literally forgot it just now. So everyone, we got Andreessen joining. Ah, by the way, Alex, massive shout out, man. Great space yesterday. I couldn't join. My apologies, but
All
it's a
good. Thank
pleasure
you
to
so
see the
much.
attention, man.
It's
Well
a
done,
good
bro.
space.
Yeah.
Yeah, I joined pretty late, but it got disconnected afterwards. What happened?
Yeah, it just crashed. I don't know.
Oh.
So the entire time it was glitching about like adding people and
Mm.
I wasn't seeing a lot of requests and stuff, and then towards the end it got glitchy and ended.
Oh yeah.
So
It
not sure.
happens. It happens.
All right. Without further ado, I've just made you co-host Ian, so you can help
Yep.
me bring people up. Without further ado, we've got Marc and Andreessen on stage.
Yes, we do.
And Elon, Marc, I've asked Elon if he could join. He said maybe. So I'm going to send him an invite. It would be great to get Elon back here as well. Would
Hmm.
make for a pretty sick conversation. So I've just sent him the invite now. How are you, Marc?
Good, awesome. Hey guys, how's everybody doing?
Hey.
Good, man. Good. I appreciate you
Good
making
dude.
the time despite the scheduling error.
No sweat. Been looking forward to it.
Cool, mate. So I've got
Awesome.
a lot of
Thank you,
questions
Jeff.
ready, and I think most of the questions will be. So we've got a pretty tight panel organized. We've all shared our questions with each other earlier to make this a pretty interactive conversation. And then if Elon jumps in, we've got some questions for you guys to do a similar fireside chat as the one you had with Peter Thiel. That was an interesting conversation.
Awesome.
All right, man. Let me invite one more. Let me get Tara in. Cool. All right, so I'm going to kick it off while we wait for more people to join. Marc, I'm going to start with, before kicking it off, Ian, my audio's good. Everything's fine?
Yeah, everything's perfect. Just
Cool.
perfect.
All right. So the way we're going to do it, guys, is I've got a few questions. Ian, Brian, other panelists, Alex V. We've shared our questions together. So if I ask a question you want to add on to it, because I've got a list of questions for the first 15, 20 minutes, and then we can do a bit of a free for all if Elon doesn't join. But Marc, the first question I have is based on current events with FTX and what's happening with Sam. I know you were in the space a few days ago, a few weeks ago now, when the implosion was happening. So I'm guessing you've been keeping a close eye. What are your thoughts, and is there anything that happened behind the scenes, whether you've been approached by Sam for a bailout, anything at all that you could share with us?
Yeah, so I won't talk a lot about specific individuals or companies. Try to kind of stay general on stuff. We were not my just as background, like my firm is a very big kind of in high scale now crypto investment effort. We were never in business with FTX. And I should also say, look, I feel good. I feel great about our team and that we weren't involved. I should also say we don't take any pleasure, kind of in the fact that we missed it and other people got bit because, quite honestly, frauds do happen. And if you look at kind of the great frauds over time, people, very smart people do get bit. So I think there's maybe a little bit too much kind of satisfaction maybe people are taking in some of the people who got bit, and I think it's just when somebody's out to deceive you, it's and you make a lot of investments, it's hard to get that right 100% of the time. But yeah, having said that, we weren't involved. We didn't know. I mean, we didn't know Sam really as a person. We knew of Sam, so we knew of Sam from a previous kind of adventure in the crypto markets that you guys might recall, which was Sushi Swap, where Sam at least ended up taking control of Sushi Swap, and there was sort of a lot of I would say, I don't know, smoke around that whole situation. And then yeah, I mean, we've been involved in Coinbase from the very beginning, and I'm actually currently on the board of Coinbase, and so the companies were competitors, and so we kind of sidestepped the whole thing. I think the big thing I'd say is our thesis on crypto is unchanged, and I think that's kind of a, maybe my straight people is kind of a strong statement these days, but like our thesis is unchanged. The sort of vision of crypto and dream of crypto as a decentralized financial system. The idea of sort of shadowy, kind of offshore centralized entities, that are set up in a way where, the money can be stolen, is antithetical to the entire thesis of crypto, from our standpoint. And so, I actually, whatever happened at FTX, I actually think it doesn't actually have that much substantively to do with crypto. It was an offshore entity. It was an offshore centralized entity where it turned out somebody, people could get the money apparently. And so, I think the dream of crypto remains the dream of crypto. I think in time it will be viewed at, the sort of what's happened with FTX will be viewed as sort of more proof of the need for actual true crypto. As I said, that's a hard sell right at the moment, but substantively, I think that's right.
So I would love to hear your thoughts on like the legal proceedings against SBF and what this means, if whether more charges are coming down the line for, other players involved in the FTX situation, including whether Binance could get in trouble for it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I actually don't know. Everything I know about FTX, I know from reading the newspaper, the same as you guys, or, from listening to people's interviews. I don't have any specific knowledge on either that front or on Binance. I guess maybe the obvious thing to say would just be that, you'll read this kind of trope, that basically like crypto is this unregulated, kind of Wild West thing. And I mean, I don't know, maybe that's a little bit true, but like actually, in our experience, there's actually a lot of regulation. And, the American crypto companies for sure are like very regulated, and have lots of regulatory scrutiny and have people crawling all over them all the time. From the government and from big accounting firms and from law firms and so forth, and have big, compliance staffs and compliance teams and lawyers and so forth. So, the American companies, I think, are actually quite highly regulated. And then, the fact that, and again, all I know is what I read, but, the fact that both the SEC, I guess today, and the Justice Department have moved on FTX, they clearly believe it falls under their purview to regulate and prosecute. So, the system is in motion, I guess I would say.
Okay.
Do you think? Do you think? So we had the debate during the early spaces whether we're going to be entering a similar bear market to 2018. After FTX, that became more and more likely. What are you guys planning for in the next few years? Do you expect a long bear market or a quick recovery?
Yeah, so the way we invest, we invest through a venture capital lens, and I'll just kind of take you through the basics of that. So we invest basically with a lens that says the thing that we're going for is some sort of fundamental technological or economic change, right? That's like really going to matter. Like the sort of classic kind of 10x, right? Something being done 10x better, something being done 10x cheaper, something being 10x more available than it used to be. So we're looking for really substantive underlying technological change. We're looking for a team of people who have a long-term commitment to building a business. Taking that technological change and then using it to build a great product and using it to build a great business. Our assumption when we invest, our assumption every time is that we're going to be involved for 10 years or more, right? And if you look at the data for venture capital, for what we do, generally the time from investment to exit, kind of ranges over time. It kind of ranges from 7 years on the fast side to 11 years on the slow side. And then for the great companies or the great, projects, efforts, networks that get built, that 11 years might be 15 or 20 or 30 years, right? Like, if you were one of the original investors in, the great tech companies of today, 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, you probably would wish that you had, stayed in them the whole time and actually never sold the stock. And so we always kind of take that approach. I differentiate that from two other kinds of approaches. The sort of polar opposite is just trading. And of course, I have a lot of respect for traders and they have a specialized skill set for what they do, but it's just not what we do. And then there's this kind of intermediate class of investors that are kind of venture-ish crypto funds, but are set up as hedge funds. And they run, and the reason that happened is because, the crypto assets are liquid, right? Often right out of the gate. Whereas, with classic venture investments, when we invest in a Series A, kind of classic venture company, the stock's, not liquid, right? For the first several years. So I think that my point is, I think the fact that with new crypto projects, the crypto was liquid in the beginning has caused a lot of crypto funds to be set up as hedge funds, meaning they're on like a 1-year investment cycle and they're on a 1-year compensation cycle, and they kind of end up being active traders, even if that's not really what they were set up to do. And that approach may make sense, and maybe they're more nimble than we are and so forth. And so maybe there's an advantage to that, but our approach is just go hard the other way. We assume we're locked up for a long time. We basically don't trade. We very rarely make a trading decision. It's almost always something that we've held for many years. And so anyway, I go through that long version of that just to kind of say we're not trying to play any kind of short or even medium term price thing. we don't even really have a view on prices, to be totally honest. And so I certainly would not make a prediction on that.
To add on to what you just said, by the way, Mark, if you can get closer to the mic, if it's possible, just to get your volume a bit louder, it would be great. But for anyone not in crypto, the point that Mark made is really important, and we discussed this at length. Crypto VC funds kind of became like hedge funds because they get immediate liquidity. So when you invest in a project as a VC, your equity is locked up for 5, 10, 15 years. But in this case, you get the tokens within weeks or months. And what happened is when we were in a bull market, all the tokens were heavily inflated and all the VCs were immediately selling the tokens, getting an immediate, kind of getting all their money back in some cases. So that's what made the last bull market pretty unsustainable. And that's why we saw a lot of projects crash since, because a lot of VCs just dumped their tokens because they got early liquidity. So I'm glad you made this point. And I know with Andreessen, you guys are, you guys have a pretty long-term view on every investment. Before moving so my next topic, I want to ask you a few questions about the concept of free speech and obviously Elon, the Twitter files. But before doing so, I've got one more question about crypto and the metaverse. Facebook's rebrand to Meta, obviously it was initially, everyone praised that decision and then the sentiment changed over the last few months. What are your thoughts on Facebook? I think you guys invested in Instagram. Correct me if I'm wrong, not sure if you invested in Facebook, but would love your thoughts on where Facebook is heading with their recent rebrand.
Yeah, so I'm also on the Facebook board. So I'm on the Meta board. So, and as a board member, I shouldn't really be saying anything. So I'll just say what, I'll basically say, I think what Marc says, which is, it's actually very similar. Marc has the same mentality, that I just kind of relayed, I think, for his company, which is, it's a long-term mentality. And so he's making he's making a long-term bet and a long-term investment, in building, basically what he thinks is the computing platform of the future. He's, the company is pouring a lot of resources into it, throughout kind of the R&D stack and content and everything else. And so I don't know. I think it's the kind of thing, and here, I'm tooting my own horn here because I'm associated with the company, but like, I think it's the kind of thing that great companies should do, right? Like, it's like what's the point of being a great, technology company at scale if you can't undertake the sort of large scale R&D efforts, that kind of, fundamentally bring new technologies into the world. And, we look back over the course of the preceding century or whatever, and we idolize, people like Henry Ford or Thomas Edison, or we idolize the, Howard Hughes, or kind of these great companies over, 50 or 100 years that built, all the modern technologies that we, all take for granted today. And I think, like, as an American, like, and as maybe like a world citizen, I feel like it's great that we have companies and founders and leaders that are willing to make these big bets. And so, and I certainly think he's, top of the list on that.
Yeah, and I think that judging that decision so early on, when the metaverse is a concept that just started catching attention, in my opinion, is very unfair. The initial hype and then the FUD afterwards doesn't make sense. That's a 5, 10, 15-year vision, and one that it's just too early to start seeing results today. But in terms of the metaverse moving forward, and that's my last question, focus on Web3 and crypto. The metaverse moving forward, how do you see that evolve, especially the concept of an open metaverse with digital ownership playing a key foundational role in that? How long do you think it will take for us to have that open metaverse, and how would that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I can't, it's hard to say. People have to build it. My ideas are always always go back to the original internet architecture, right? Like, I came of age, kind of came into the industry in the late 80s, early 90s. And, some people in the space are probably old enough to remember kind of what the internet was like in those days.
I do.
Right? Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. Special place. Like, it was a very special place. It was like a very special set of people. It was this thing where it kind of attracted the smartest people in the world at the time. It was an incredible, we'll talk about free speech, but like, it was an incredible environment of free speech, free exchange of ideas, free expression. A lot of modern culture today came out of that, kind of came out of that area. It was invented, it was kind of invented. Like, if you, in 1992, if you went on what was at the time, social networking at the time was sort of in the form of this thing called Usenet. Right. And if you went to Usenet, it had it had all these different news groups, all these different forums that you could be a part of. And there was this, there was like comp and, for computer science, and there was sci for science and all these different ones. And then there was alt, right?
Yep.
And then under alt was like every conceivable form of possible like interest and human activity that you could possibly imagine, and people were debating every single aspect of human life and politics and society and creative expression and all
Even
kinds of
woke
things.
culture came from there, right? Woke culture, all the terms that people use now for, gender identity and stuff, that came from news groups.
Yeah, a lot of that was some of that was later, some of that was Tumblr, which kind
Yep,
of was
Tumblr. Yep, it's like how would you call it? Like a place for brewing these ideas, right? College
yeah,
kids, they go there and then they put their gender studies stuff. They merge it with fandom, and now you have this marriage of ugly fandom with wokeness, and it's just it's awful.
yeah. But it started, regardless of how it ended up, it started as
Yep.
this very free form, kind of thing. And so anyway, and the web, and then out, when we built the web in the modern form, like we built it kind of in that image, right? And so the idea, of course, was anybody can create a web, browser, anybody can create a web server, anybody can create a website.
Yep.
There were all kinds of yep, exactly. There are all kinds of architectural decisions we made at the time. So I'll just give you an example. Like we made the decision at the time, and this predated me, but like the group of people that I kind of ended up falling into kind of made this decision that, for example, the protocol should be text-based, not binary. And it was at the time a very, kind of controversial thing because it's like, internet was very slow and inefficient at the time and bandwidth was at a premium. And so you've got these inefficient text-based protocols and like, why are you making it so slow? And the answer was because it basically means anybody can create a web server by basically creating a program that emits text. And so you could create a web server with like, 4 lines of scripting code at the time. And that was, kind of how the web got bootstrapped. And so if it were totally up to me, like, the metaverse would work a lot like that. Like it would work a lot like the web. It would work a lot like the open internet. It would be something
It would
where,
make a lot of sense. Yeah, it's
right.
decentralized in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Where millions of people could contribute, right? Millions of people
Yep.
could contribute. Millions of
Very
people could
sort of.
write, create experiences. Yep, exactly.
And people
And
made
so,
tools for this, right? Like there were like at least a dozen different web browsing, sorry, not web editing tools. Microsoft had Encarta, and then later on had like Front Page. But then you also had like Dreamweaver and all these web-based tools that now are very simplified, and they use it on like Squarespace or something.
yeah, that's right. And you'll notice as we talk about this, right? The kind of the dream of crypto, right? The dream of crypto and blockchain is actually very similar to the internet dream, right? The idea of
Yep.
an open system, the idea of a decentralized system, the idea of a permissionless system, the idea of a system in which you can have 1 million people contributing without anybody in the middle being able to wag their finger and say no. And look, that's what created the internet. Like that's how we got to where we are, and it like worked incredibly well, I think. And so
Yes.
I would hope that's kind of where the metaverse goes, but there's a lot of work, of a lot of smart people between now and then. So hopefully in the next, whatever, 5 or 10 years, over time we'll get there.
And before we pivot to free speech, do you think we may head to, where we're preaching decentralization now, could we head to more centralization similar to Web 1 started out decentralized and obviously it's a lot less decentralized today?
Yeah, so we talk about that a lot. So my partner Chris Dixon has talked about a lot about this. So I'll kind of borrow his kind of phrasing on this, which I agree with, which is, there's like these 2 models. It's like the tech industry kind of goes back and forth between kind of this horizontal model and vertical model. So like PCs were like horizontal. There were all these different companies that kind of made, different layers of the stack that made the PC. The iPhone is, vertical. It's a completely, it's a single company that kind of makes everything, including, increasingly its own silicon. So there's like this horizontal, vertical back and forth. And then there's this centralized, decentralized back and forth, which is kind of the sort of larger version of that. The full version of centralized is just a single integrated company, a sort of a classic walled garden. And then the full version of decentralized is a network, right? And so, and originally in the old, in the old days with the internet, it was a face off between, the internet and AOL, right? And,
right. There was a closed system. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, there was a while there where AOL was better in the sense of like AOL had more features. AOL was like, maybe, there were a bunch of advantages. There were a bunch of things. There was a lot of content that was on AOL that wasn't on the internet yet. And by the way, there was an economic model on AOL. People could get paid for content on AOL where they couldn't get paid for content on the internet. So there were advantages to the centralized approach. It's just the decentralized approach allowed for more creativity. And so it just turned out once the internet got going, you were just going to have the internet was going to end up with a million times more features than the centralized thing, just because you were going to unleash the whole world of creativity. And so basically, it's like, yeah, it's like companies versus networks. One of the ways that we pursue this, with our program now, basically, is like when we invest in a crypto company, that's structured as a C corporation, we'll invest with a term sheet that basically allows them to flip into being a network anytime they want. And so we basically invest kind of agnostic as to the outcome, because we want to let the founders decide where that shakes out. But there's for obvious reasons, there's a fairly large number of founders now that want to do that and want to flip, and even if they start as a company, they want to take their system decentralized and build a network. And I would certainly hope that I would hope that there are many more networks in the next 20, 30 years that are of the scale of the internet, the web, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and so forth. Because
It's a bit like IBM, right? I'm sorry, it's a bit like IBM back in the 80s when they had the PC, and that was a closed ecosystem, and then they just started licensing out the PC, x86 to just literally anybody, and that's why PCs got so much larger than the Macintosh, which was a closed system. And then there are like other rivals. I think Steve Jobs tried to create the what was the system that he made? It did like Next PC or something like that. Yeah. Yeah, it's a closed ecosystem. It didn't really take off at all, but we saw who won. Decentralization won in the end, because innovation happened, right? Different countries started producing their stuff, like Taiwan, Korea, and that's the reason why they're powerhouses today, because of the decentralization.
Yeah, and this is the thing, and there's again, let's get a little bit of the free speech topic, but there's always this, and you could also say this is even a more generalized kind of question of like the different economic models of like socialism versus capitalism, which is there's always this tendency, there's this thing of like, okay, if the system is really open, right? If the economy is really open, people can do what they want. If the web is really open, if crypto is really open, then bad things might happen, right? Like bad people might do bad things, people might create bad things, people might say the wrong thing. People might do something we disapprove of, right? And and by the way, some of those things are going to be actually bad, and there's going to society's going to have to figure out a way to deal with them. But the other side of that is if you start with a restricted system, a restricted top-down system where people have to get permission for everything new, then you just know for sure that most new things won't happen, right? I mean, number one is like
chilling speech. Has a chilling effect. Sorry.
Exactly. So speech, but also it's sort of speaking, writing code, building new technologies, starting new businesses. Like what those things all have in common is it's sort of individual human beings who are the sort of the closest to the information required to know whether something's a good idea or not, and then devoting a huge amount of effort to bringing something new into the world where they don't even know whether it's going to work, right? And so at least historically, the systems that enable this sort of decentralized innovation, decentralized speech, decentralized finance, historically they've outperformed. The U.S. outperformed the Soviet Union. Many examples like that through history. And so I think you get maximum creativity with an open system, with a decentralized system. And my hope over time, as I said, is that we'll see a lot more of those.
Yeah, I agree, and I think I've always said that decentralization is still an experiment in progress. Obviously, democracy could be one example of that, and I'll use that to kind of pivot to free speech. What's your general take on the recent movement behind free speech?
Yeah, we saw your tweets. Free speech.
Yeah, I was gonna, and I'll refer to a tweet now. So one specific tweet, and I highly recommend you guys check out Marc's tweets and try to make sense of him. But one particular tweet I'll bring up as well. Quote: "Baseless has become a code word for true," which I love. I'd love to know what you mean by that.
Yeah, so Peter Thiel, Peter has the hard form. I would say the strong form of this claim. Peter said in a talk a while back. He said, "Anything you're not allowed to say is by definition true." Right?
I love it.
Because
yeah.
because that's what they're afraid of, right? That
threatens them.
Exactly. No, I will not go that far. I can think of some things that you're not allowed to say that are not actually true. So I will not go that far. But I will say, look, whenever anybody puts themselves in a position where they think they can decide what's true or not on behalf of everybody else, right? I just think like that's a hopeless. That's you're in the position of the Pope judging Galileo. Like you're just in this position where no human being is smart enough, or wise enough or moral enough to be able to make those decisions. And so there's a lot of people running around now who have sort of appointed themselves hall monitors and have decided that they can call what other people say baseless or whatever. It's always jargon, right? It's always some sort of
Right, the
specific set of terms.
Disinformation Governance Board, and that's like literally, or was a thing, and they're still trying to push it through NGOs.
Yeah, so the Aspen Institute recently, the most Orwellian thing I've seen recently is the Aspen Institute they have this new program on what they call information disorder.
Wow, that's a
It's
new
like,
one. I'm adding that
right,
to my
it's like
list. Information disorder.
information disorder,
Nice.
and like, let me come out strongly on the side of information disorder, right? Like, yeah, like that's how, because like information order, like what, like information order sounds like the most the most
Oh, it's
Orwellian thing
very
you could
Orwellian.
possibly say, right?
Yeah.
Um,
So, I mean, more on that, so because, terms like baseless and misinformation, they're all code words for anything that isn't favorable to the mainstream media or the far left narrative that's dominated mostly by woke people. How do we, as a broader society, combat all these efforts to disenfranchise, I would say, the vast majority of the human race? I mean, how do we fight that as a
yeah, I mean, look,
decentralized group of people?
yeah, I guess it's obviously a very big question, very deep topic. All of these things are choices. I guess my big thing is all these things are choices. Like who's in charge of the society is a choice. Who makes the rules is a choice. Who gets listened to is a choice. Who gets laughed at is a choice.
Yep.
And so the foundation of all of it just kind of has to be like we need to actually decide what we want. And if we want to live in a society in which there's a small number of people who get to tell everybody what to think, like then we'll get that. And if we want to live in a society in which we have these are questions that have been litigated and fought over for hundreds and hundreds of years, right? To be able to be in a society where people can say what they want and not be shut down. And so we have to want it. We have to take action. We
Hmm.
have to be willing to stand up. We have to be willing to support people who stand up.
It's
It's gonna be
basic
a fight.
cancel culture, right? I mean, we have to resist it actively. I mean, in my opinion, we have to resist it actively. We see a person getting canceled for, really dumb reasons, like that Google engineer, the one who got fired, right? Because he put out a paper that was, he said that there are differences between genders or whatever, and they asked him to make the paper. I forget the guy's name, but like, we have to stand up for these people.
James
I mean, if we
Damore, I think.
James Damore, thank you, yeah, James Damore, and if we don't do it, then we're basically, our silence is compliance, right? That's the message that they say, and it's, in my opinion, 100% true.
But then it's getting harder and harder to stand up to free speech. Now it's just so easy to censor people. Before social media, it was a lot harder. When you're on the street, when you're with your friends, the government can't be right next to you, or any central body be right next to you and say, hey, stop saying that. But now with social media, using algorithms, it's much easier to censor. And we've seen competitors come up competing with Twitter, and none of them, to my knowledge, gain traction.
And what they were
So
deplatformed as well. Keep that in mind, right?
it,
I mean, Parler was removed as one of the first platforms to compete with Twitter properly. Was removed from the App Store and the Google Ads, the Play Store, and so they could not even like reasonably compete against Twitter at the time.
but then my question, Mark, is where do you draw the line? Because some level of censorship, most of us agree, and that was a debate we had 2 days ago, is needed. But where can and as soon as a person draws the line, then that same person or that same group of people can then move the line. So how do you find that balance?
Yeah, so a couple things. So one is, I actually don't quite agree with what you said. I mean, I understand why you said it, and there's truth to it for sure, but I don't totally agree with the conclusion that things are worse now than they used to be before the internet on censorship. So before the internet, and I am old enough to remember this, like most contrary information just simply didn't exist, right? Like it
Yeah.
wasn't available, right? Like if you wanted to like discover a heterodox view to something that was like a prevailing belief in the society, like you literally was like, okay, I gotta go to the library, right? I
Hmm.
gotta like go in the card catalog. I gotta try to find a book, and like hopefully the library has bought that book. And by the way, maybe they haven't, and if they haven't, like I'm SOL.
And they
And
would put your name
so,
on a list if you're, if they're in the FBI and you were looking up, bomb
oh yeah,
making
by the way,
manuals or something.
in the back of the book was a list of all the people who checked the book out.
Yep.
You could actually just read the names. It's like, yep, they're all the wrong thinkers, right?
Yep.
And so, look, the even after all the censorship of the last 15 years or whatever, like information is still so much more widely available online today than it used to be. Like just like to many orders of magnitude. And and therefore the freak out, right? I mean, that's why the sort of home monitors are as freaked out as they are. There's a degree to which like the campaign is not working.
Is that why they took down Z Library? I'm not sure if you're familiar with Z Library. It used to be this online free library of all these pirated books, but people mostly went there because they wanted to download stuff that was just unavailable, to even order, right? Like that was the big impetus for taking them down, in my opinion.
When was the library taken down?
A few weeks ago, I want to say sometime in the last month or like the month before. It was run by a couple of Russian guys, and it was a free library. You could pirate any book you wanted.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the problem with books is, the obvious problem is copyright, right? So Google, Google, for those of you who followed this thing, like Google ran into the hard version of this problem as well when they did their Google Books program, right? And the sort of result of that is that Google Books, I think it's like 1923 is like the copyright cutoff for public domain, and so Google Books has like every book published prior to 1923 that's in any of the major university libraries, but they don't. I don't think they really have any books after 1923, and
It's all
just
nerfed.
got.
Yeah, they got
Well,
excerpts.
it's like you even have this thing where it's like, there will be a book that was published that's under copyright, and then the publishing company went out of business. But like, does somebody own, whoever owned the data of the publishing company, did not own the copyrights? Maybe they've sat dormant for 20 years. And but you still can't get clean rights to do it. So there's issues with that. It's just this artifact of how books get published. I don't know about you guys. Like, I mean, look, I pay for a lot of content online. We're involved in Substack, and I pay for a lot of Substack, and I love it. But like a lot of the sort of most interesting kind of heterodox alternative information on the internet is free, right? It was produced for free. It's distributed for free.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's out there. Like, as long as that continues to be the case, like the censorship battles will get fought, and they're very important. But the internet itself is still very resilient to this kind of control, and I think in the long run, I think the censorship in the long run is a losing battle.
Yeah, and I think we saw that with. I read somewhere that when the Biden laptop story was censored, people started searching for it 5 times more 2 days after it was censored. And then the Andrew Tate story as well. So when he was censored, he blew up even further. So what we're seeing now is when something gets censored on the main platforms, people are trying to find it elsewhere, and they try to search for that information. Having said that, what are your thoughts on the recent moves and Elon's way of running Twitter?
Yeah. So we're also involved in that. So we're invested with Elon in his takeover. I mean, we're thrilled. I mean, we're excited. We were excited to do it with him. We're excited by what he's doing. I would just say 2 things. Like, he's been very vocal kind of on his views on this stuff. So I would just say 2 things, which is, one is like all of my private conversations with him mirror exactly what he said in public, which is that he is very committed to free speech. He cares a lot about freedom of expression. He talks very kind of openly and emotionally about the future of civilization and the need for free expression. And it's the culture that he comes out of, and it's the culture that made everything else that he's done in his life possible. And so he takes it very seriously. And so I think he's a true believer. And then
That's good.
The other thing is, like, there's a business opportunity. Like, there's just a flat out there's the great finance term arbitrage. If everybody's going left, then there may be money to be made in going right. Not ideologically, I mean, but just like as a if all of the other major companies are going to have big censorship campaigns going, then being the service that has more freedom of speech is going to be just a straight up commercial opportunity.
I think even Mark Zuckerberg has weighed in on this, right? When he was speaking at the New York Times book thing, he said that it's going to be like, it's an interesting experiment to see where Elon goes with this, and that maybe Meta might even follow suit if it looks successful.
I would say, without commenting specifically on Facebook, I would say that I would say every tech CEO I talk to is watching Elon like a hawk.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
So, and if they're running if they're running some sort of social platform or user generated content platform, they're watching very carefully to see if they can maybe learn from what he's doing. And then the other thing that's happening is they're all watching what he's doing in terms of the company culture and how he's running the company. And he took out 80% of the employees and contractors right up front, and he's running the company in a fundamentally leaner and much more engineering centric way that has become kind of the standard in the Valley. And so there's a lot of CEOs who are watching him very carefully, saying, if you can run like that, maybe we can, or some version of it.
Maybe fire all the diversity teams, because they don't contribute to any of the engineering.
Let's just say there are a lot. Let's just say, there are a lot. let's just say, yeah, a lot of there are companies in the last 20 years that became very, let's just say, fully staffed in many areas, some of which had a direct bearing on making products and selling them to customers, and maybe there were many other kind of goals that companies ended up strapping on that maybe they now wonder about.
Yeah.
And so it's a chance to kind of re-ask some pretty fundamental questions, which I think a lot of CEOs would like to re-ask.
I would hope so, because I mean, given how, I hate calling them the woke, but that's what we're referring to them as. I mean, these guys instituted their policies through the what was it called? It's like not terms of service, but it was like some sort of broad document where it says you basically have to be woke if you're running a Silicon Valley company, and they got all these different companies to sign on. It started at, I think, at GitHub, right? One of the engineers there, she made this thing. It's like oh god, I can't remember the exact name of it. Name's not coming to me, but you know what I'm talking about, right? Like all these companies signed onto it, GitHub signed onto it, and then there's like a whole list of like all these organizations that, for all intents and purposes, are just producing code, or they're producing products, and now they're all like signed onto these diversity ideas, and it's actually driving them down. I think one of the few companies that didn't sign onto it is Slack, right? They actually some internal employees tried to enforce it in there, and they were like, the CEO was like, no, you're not going to change the company culture to suit your vision of whatever, and they fired all those guys, which is pretty interesting.
So Marc, I'll give Brian the mic for a quick question, then Alex, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I know you're close to Elon. I was just curious, do you see it as a positive or a negative that he kind of tweets everything that's on his mind, even like the controversial stuff, like the Fauci, prosecute Fauci stuff? Do you think that's a smart business move? Do you think that maybe he could tone things down? Where do you fall on that issue?
My whole life, I've been listening to people kind of say, wow, the thing about public figures is they're so dishonest, right? They don't say what they think. They're always, corporate executives are always standing up in front of crowds, and they're always using this kind of corporate speak. And people have all these hidden agendas, and there's all these secrets, there's things we're not allowed to find out. And, nobody's like telling us what they're actually doing. And so I guess I would say, like, to the extent that that has been like generally true for a long time, like Elon is definitely 100% the opposite of that. And so, without, trying to, whatever, get into any specific thing. I mean, he tells you exactly what he's thinking, right? Like he tells you exactly what he's thinking. Like, exactly what he's thinking. And it's people, if you talk to people who work for him, they'll tell you the same thing. Like they wake up in the morning, they check his tweets. They're like, wow, that's what he's thinking today. Right. Like, and if they talk to him, right. And if they talk to him, they catch him in the halls, he's going to say the exact same thing. Right. It is literally what he's thinking. And so I think it's, I don't know, like, I think it's I think it's stripped away, it's a stripping away of what I maybe had become like an overly, synthetic, stylistic, kind of obscurantist kind of way of having, there was this book written like 50 years ago called The Image. And it's this book about sort of political culture, but you apply it more broadly, like corporate culture also. And so in the Image, he talks about this concept he calls pseudo events. And he says pseudo events are basically, it's like, a press conference is a pseudo event, right? Or like a photo op is a pseudo event. Yeah. Right. A pseudo event is something where everybody shows up, like, the corporate executive or the politician or whatever, they show up to do the thing. All the reporters show up to cover the thing. They write the story about the thing. Everybody acts like it's a real thing, but everybody's fully aware that it's totally fake. Right. Like, it doesn't mean anything. It's just like, it's just something that's a deliberately manufactured illusion. And then, the actual like real decisions and real conversations are happening behind the scenes, and, people in secret conference rooms and smoke-filled rooms, where normal people never have insight into it. Yep. And I think we got used, under mass media, right? Under, 3 television networks and, 1 newspaper per city and so forth. We got used to living in a world in which we just assumed we were living in a world of pseudo events, and then people got cynical, right? Like a lot of, when I was a kid, like it was,
it's a simulation.
Yeah, it's like it's a simulation, but it's like a simulation. Everybody knows it's a simulation. Like
nobody's actually... It's a simulation and simulacra. I think Baudrillard talked about that in his book of that same title, right? And it's we know everything is fake, but we just go along with it anyway, knowing it's fake.
Yeah, exactly, and then it breeds cynicism, right? It causes people to get cynical. It makes another guy to read on this. David Foster Wallace wrote this thing about kind of television culture, and he talked about the irony. He wrote this manifesto. It was like 20 years ago, 25 years ago. But he wrote this manifesto. It was like against irony was kind of the theme of it. And it's like, irony is poison. Like irony is what happens. Irony is the attitude that you adopt when you know you can't trust the people who are in charge and talking to you. And there's my business partner Ben has somebody who's very close to a relative who worked as a lineman for the phone company for many years. Climbing up the telephone poles, to fix the lines. Which is a very important and also quite dangerous job. And he once asked his relative. He said, did you ever interact with any of the executives at the company? And he said, oh yeah, they come by once a year and blow smoke up my ass. Right. Like you just assumed, you're working for these companies, you just assume you're being lied to all the time. You're a customer of these companies, you just assume you're being lied to all the time. Yep. You're listening to a politician on TV, you just assume you're being lied to.
And sincerity.
If there's sufficient media control, right? Like if all the media is top down and centralized, then they can get away with it, right? Right. And there's sort of this compact that develops between, the people doing the talking and the people covering it, where they're just going to, all they're going to do is write about pseudo events. And so I think it's, I don't know, like I think it's I think it's stripped away, it's a stripping away of what I maybe had become like an overly, synthetic, stylistic, kind of obscurantist kind of way of having, there was this book written like 50 years ago called The Image. And it's this book about sort of political culture, but you apply it more broadly like corporate culture also. And so in the Image, he talks about this concept he calls pseudo events. And he says pseudo events are basically it's like a press conference is a pseudo event, right? Or like a photo op is a pseudo event, right? A pseudo event is something where everybody shows up, like the corporate executive or the politician or whatever. They show up to do the thing. All the reporters show up to cover the thing. They write the story about the thing. Everybody acts like it's a real thing, but everybody's fully aware that it's totally fake. Right, like it doesn't mean anything. It's just something that's a deliberately manufactured illusion. And then the actual like real decisions and real conversations are happening behind the scenes, and people in secret conference rooms and smoke-filled rooms, where normal people don't never have insight into it. Yep. And I think we got used, under mass media, right, under 3 television networks and 1 newspaper per city and so forth. We got used to living in a world in which we just assumed we were living in a world of pseudo events, and people got cynical, right? Like a lot of when I was a kid, like it was
it's a simulation.
Yeah, it's like it's a simulation, but it's like a simulation. Everybody knows it's a simulation. Like
nobody's actually. It's a simulation and simulacra. I think Baudrillard talked about that in his book of that same title, right? And it's we know everything is fake, but we just go along with it anyway, knowing it's fake.
Yeah, exactly, and then it breeds cynicism, right? It causes people to get cynical. It makes another guy to read on this. David Foster Wallace wrote this thing about kind of television culture, and he talked about the irony. He wrote this manifesto. It was like 25 years ago. But he wrote this manifesto. It was like against irony was kind of the theme of it. And it's like irony is poison. Like irony is what happens. Irony is the attitude that you adopt when you know you can't trust the people who are in charge and talking to you, and there's my business partner Ben has somebody who's very close to a relative who worked as a lineman for the phone company for many years, climbing up the telephone poles, to fix the lines, which is a very important and also quite dangerous job. And he once asked his relative. He said, did you ever interact with any of the executives at the company? And he said, oh yeah, they come by once a year and blow smoke up my ass. Right. Like you just assumed, you're working for these companies, you just assume you're being lied to all the time. You're a customer of these companies, you just assume you're being lied to all the time. Yep. You're listening to a politician on TV, you just assume you're being lied to. And
sincerity.
If there's sufficient media control, right? Like if all the media is top down and centralized, then they can get away with it, right? Right. And there's sort of this compact that develops between, the people doing the talking and the people covering it, where they're just going to, all they're going to do is write about pseudo events. And so, I don't know. I think like I wanted to go through that because it's like, okay, why is somebody like Elon, like why does what he's doing even come across as surprising, right? Because in a sense, right, the least surprising thing in the world would be somebody who just like stands up and tells the truth. Like you might even say that's like the least surprising thing somebody could do. It's like just like the obvious default thing to do. And yet it is so surprising because we're just not used to it. Right. And I think it's a model of leadership that I think is going to be, I think more and more people are going to figure out like this is actually the right way to do things.
It's like when he joins a space and he doesn't have like a PR team, coaching him. Like, when we did a space of Hunter Biden, he had like a PR guy standing behind him, and they would literally, vet the questions and censor people. And if they didn't like a question, they leave, right? And that's exactly what happened. He left.
Yeah, like and again, there are people who know him a lot better than I do. I will just say, like, he's never told me one thing in public that doesn't match what he said, or he's never told me one thing in private that doesn't match what he says in public.
Mm-hmm.
And so
that answers my question. Like, I was wondering whether his tweets are strategic or just honest, and they just seem to be his honest thoughts, no filter.
There was this. He goes through. He's been through various legal proceedings over the years, and there was this one leaked email from one of his boards where, I don't know, they were yelling at him about his tweets or something, and he finally just says in the email chain, he's like, you know what, like, I'm just going to tweet what I think and let the chips fall where they may.
That's pretty based.
And it's like, shit, like, yeah, like, why not, right? Like, why,
Yeah.
Now people may have issues with the substance and but like the idea that he's some, like, I don't know, yeah, maybe I don't want to push it too far, but I'd say, like, yeah, like, telling the truth in public should be the least radical thing anybody does, right? Not the most
Everybody
radical
does.
thing.
It should be normal.
Yeah, like,
right?
I think, yeah, exactly. And back to your point before I go to Alex, back to your point is we were complaining when people were too secretive and not being, Mark Zuckerberg's kind of the opposite of Elon in my view. And a lot of people complain how he's not out there more, he's not sharing his thoughts, he's not being more transparent. And then you have Elon being too transparent, and then people complain like, hey, these things should be kept private, you shouldn't be tweeting them. But on the other side of the other side of the argument, like, every tweet of Elon's has impact. When he came on our space the first time, and the first thing he said was Doge to the moon, and then while we were on the space, we just saw Doge pump. Like, these things are just not normal. We've never, like, the complete opposite of when I had Hunter Biden on the show. It's like I had a set rules I had to follow, and when I broke the rules, everything went to shit, and I was on the front page of Fox News after the show went to shit. It's just like, it's such a dichotomy. I'll go to ALX.
Before we do,
after that,
I just want
go ahead,
to.
Ian.
Yeah, I remember the thing I was referring to. Like in 2014, there's this thing called a contributor covenant,
Yeah.
and it's.
Can you hear me? My audio.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Can Alex hear me?
No, I don't think you can. I'll fix it up. Go ahead, Ian.
Okay, yeah. So I was saying, like, yeah, the thing I was referring to about the code of conduct, that's the contributor covenant, and they kind of, strong armed like a whole bunch of open source projects to accept it, and it's basically coding wokeness into these projects, and it's quite insane. It's quite insidious, right? I mean, so my question about that is, how do we fight against all these extremely woke efforts to control the narrative or control the culture even?
I mean, I don't, yeah, lots of people have talked about that. I don't know that I really have anything to add, other than just, like I said, these things are all choices, right? And so I think, employees have to decide, which companies they go to, which policies they want to support. I think we all have to make those decisions. Like, these have to be collective actions. Collective actions are made up of individual decisions. People have to decide what kind of world they want to live in, and they have to take actions to support that.
I've got one more question before ALX. What do you consider to be worse? Mainstream media bias, and obviously it's not all media is equal, but mainstream media bias, or social media echo chambers?
Yeah, the echo chamber thing is really interesting, because again, like, you kind of want to make the assumption, and like, there's some truth to it. It's like, okay, like, it's easy to get into the kind of a thing in social media or even in, like, YouTube or whatever, where you're just kind of seeing more of the same thing or hearing from more of the same people. Look, again, I will compare it to the past, which is, we did not have diversity of voices before the internet. Like, there's no golden age, right? Where, like, it is not true that in 1980 everybody was routinely hearing the other side of the argument, and then as of the internet coming along, they're no longer hearing it. Like, that's just simply untrue. What was happening in 1980 was the other side of the argument literally was not being represented anywhere, because it was just iced out. So I'll give you my favorite example of this. So my favorite example of this is the great, when people kind of talk about how great the media used to be and how honest everything used to be, they always talk about this guy, Walter Cronkite, right, who was the anchor of the CBS Nightly News, who was like the voice of authority in America. And they always talk about this, like, incredible moment that, like, kind of brought home his ability to kind of shape, the narrative and what Americans believed, and kind of get to the right moral position when he turned against the Vietnam War in 1968, right? And that was like the signal moment that illustrated kind of the greatness of the media at that time, the media model of that time. the other part of that story that doesn't get told is the fact that he switched to be against the Vietnam War in 1968 because he and everybody else like him was pro the Vietnam War before 1968. Right.
Right.
And if you go back and you try to find anywhere in like the narrative, the public narrative of the time, kind of before 1968 and for sure before 1965, because the Vietnam War really started really under Kennedy.
Yeah, 62.
Right. It basically, like, the counter argument basically didn't exist. Like, there were politicians who were anti the war anti the Vietnam War in the Kennedy administration. They did exist. They were on the far right. They were kind of these leftover Republican isolationists from this strain of republicanism that predated World War II that had been very discredited, and they were completely dismissed.
Paleoconservatives.
Exactly. Like old school, like pre World War II isolationists.
Yeah.
With names that are lost to history, right? Like Taft and these other guys. And so, like, it just, there was a monoculture. Like, there was a monoculture. The monoculture was for the war, as it ramped up, and then the monoculture flipped to become against the war, right? And that had a whole other set of consequences to it. But it's not like there was like a huge raging debate. Like, the monoculture went one way and then the monoculture went the other way. And we could say the same thing about many other kind of topics over the course of the last 50 or 60 years, because we just lived in this mass media environment. And by the way, it's not even that the people running the mass media had bad intent. It's just, if you only have a few voices, and they're kind of integrated together into this kind of system of prestige, right? And they come from this certain social class, they're going to tend to think the same things. They're going to tend to all agree with each other. And if you have like the economics of the way mass media used to work and the technologies that used to have, like broadcast TV, where you had this very high level of centralization, you're just not going to get representation of a broad set of voices. And so again, I would say, like, as bad as echo chambers are on the internet today, and there probably is some that probably is true to some degree.
Like Tumblr.
We're all still getting exposed to counter arguments on things with way higher frequency than we used to, like way higher frequency.
Yeah, you can just, it's a choice now, right? You can choose to be on Tumblr or Mastodon and just listen to those same people. You can go to YouTube and just listen to, right-wing voices or whatever. But you have that choice. You can listen to counter arguments, and these are more or less open platforms, even though, a lot of people are now being sort of pushed out of some of these platforms. Like on Twitch, you can't be a right-winger on Twitch. You will get banned, right? That is one of the issues with how much control, I guess, that sites like Twitch have over the conversation, right? It's basically a monopoly, and it's run by just one small group of people, sadly.
Hey, Alex.
Hey, so I know you were an initial investor back in like 2011 with Twitter. So I just wanted to ask, what were the things that drew you to initially invest in Twitter? What do you think the best things about the platform today are? And then what would you like to see like the platform improve on as far as features and user experience?
Yeah, so I mean, look, it was a genius concept, and at least for those of us who saw it early on. Even in the very early form.
No, he's
you're
back.
What's that? Yeah, you're back, Marc. Sorry, you dropped out for 2 seconds.
Yep. Yeah, so I'm just saying, like, I always thought it was a genius idea, and I, give Jack Dorsey and his colleagues at the time, Jason Goldman and the others who worked on it, just a ton of credit. It was like a real breakthrough idea, and and the way the idea presented, the way I thought about it at the time was the way the idea presented was it was actually this sort of idea out of computer science called publish subscribe. Right, so there's sort of the idea of a public graph, and the idea that people could publish, and then other people could subscribe, and that you could have this sort of one-way follow thing, right? Because the dominant social media kind of mechanism at that time was a two-way thing, and so they had this idea of have a one-way connection, and then
they called it a microblog. It's a smaller version of LiveJournal.
Exactly. Well, and that's the other thing, and then Jack had this thing, and it took me a long time to figure this out because and Ed Williams also had this thing, and where they had this philosophy where they said constraints are good. Like constraints are enabling, and it threw me in the early years when they would talk about that, because I came up in a time of software where it's just like you just like keep adding features. Like, constraints are bad. Like, you want things, you want software to do more things, and they had this design principle which was the opposite of the conventional wisdom that said constraints are good. And so specifically constraining the length of the message was a good thing.
Yep, 140.
Yeah, and like in the beginning, and you guys probably recall, like in the beginning, like this thing was mocked. Like, Twitter was ridiculed, right? Like, broadly by people who were like, "This is ridiculous. Who cares what your cat had for breakfast? nothing of any interest can be expressed in 140 characters. Like
people called Twitter shitters, right? I mean, that was like a popular Penny Arcade comic where they were making fun of Twitter, and people would use it to just, put their brain droppings on the site.
yeah, so it's just like this whole thing is absurd. It was not taken seriously. I actually remember this moment. I remember actually the first moment when a major kind of political figure took Twitter seriously. It was, at least that I remember, it was Erdogan, who was the president of Turkey, and he was getting,
Yep.
Turkey was getting kind of increasingly kind of authoritarian. And Erdogan came out and he said, I think I forget the exact quote, but something like Twitter is the biggest threat to the Turkish regime. And it was so weird because it's like in America, it's like, who cares? It's what your cat had for breakfast. And in Turkey, it's like the biggest threat to the authoritarian government. It's like
the Arab Spring, right?
Yeah.
It was enabled by Twitter. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Arab Spring kind of really, that was sort of the moment, right? That was the moment when it went from something that was considered totally trivial to something that was considered, really, really important. Now, of course, in that era, it was viewed as like, oh, political action happening on Twitter is therefore a hugely positive thing, right? Because it's leading, he's leading to, presumably freedom and peace in the Middle East. And so and then look, the other thing that happened was Obama got reelected in 2012, and there were these just glowing magazine covers and profiles and stories about how the internet was just incredibly great for democracy because Obama was able to use it for fundraising and get out the vote efforts. And so it kind of the narrative kind of shifted hard in that direction, and then of course the narrative shifted hard in the other direction after the next cycle. But yeah, so anyway, like it was just it was pure genius at the start. I mean, the whole history is obviously very documented of everything that they've been through. I just think there's a lot of genius in the original idea. Like I think the core foundational idea is still the right idea. I think publish subscribe is a great idea. I think people should be able to publish what they want, within like quite literally like bounds of the law. I think people should be able to subscribe and listen to and interact with the people they want to. I think that I think that it should be, there's no question. Oh, I'll give you something like, I don't think we've seen the first internet president yet, right? Like Obama, people wanted to say Obama was the first internet president because he used the internet for fundraising. And then people wanted to say Trump was the first internet president because he used Twitter and social media for kind of outbound communications. But I actually don't think we've seen the first internet president yet. I don't think we've seen the first internet native president who basically just does everything online, and they just do everything through social media, right? And they just
Elon could be that person.
Well, he's got this.
Unfortunately, the law says he can't be.
Oh yeah, he can't. Of course, he's not born in the U.S. I forgot.
Yep.
But his playbook, to our earlier conversation about honesty in public, his playbook does point the way, right? Like, and so I think there will be, and I don't know whether it's in 2024 or 2028 or 2032, but one of these cycles, there's going to be somebody who figures this out. And I think it's going to be great because I think it's going to be the most, just like we were saying about, it's going to be the politician who has the most direct relationship with the people that anybody's had in a very long time. It's going to be somebody who's like out there and exposed. It's going to be somebody who's who's in an actual feedback loop, with his supporters, with his voters, and is not being basically not having his message be kind of distilled into these very narrow, kind of top-down centralized channels. I think that's coming. I don't know when it comes. I think it's coming. I think it'll be great. I think it'd be great if Twitter were a platform for that.
Before I go to Alex, talking about Twitter, I read an article where Jason talked about you and others, it wasn't just you, looking at potentially buying Twitter during the Obama administration. Not sure if you can comment on that, but my question is more, first, why? And second, how would Twitter look like if you were running the show?
Oh yeah, we didn't try to. We tried. My firm tried over the years different times to invest. They could consider different kind of things over time, but nothing ever came together. We just always assumed it would always be a public company once it went public. We did not. We never envisioned that something would happen like one man deciding to buy it. But
let's say if it did happen, how would you run the show?
I mean, look, I would say Elon's strategy makes a lot of sense to me. So, he's and by the way, like, it's fairly amazing that you've got the guy who's like the #1 power user of the thing who now owns it, right? Like that's, I think that's pretty amazing. So, look, I like what he's doing. Like, I like the idea that it's going to, go back. Twitter used to describe itself. It was not that long ago that Twitter described itself as this free speech wing of the free speech party. That was not that many years ago. And so
2012, right?
Yeah. I
to
like
the
how
Guardian.
he's pushing it. And then look, the public graph, this concept of the public graph, the publish subscribe thing. like it ought to be a giant business. Like it really ought to be a really big business, because it ought to be the place where businesses are very active. It ought to be the place where people, businesses interact with customers. It's obviously not the only place that happens, but it should be one of the places where that happens. And so, I think the business opportunity is clearly very large. And then look, the more of an open platform it is, I think the bigger the business opportunity. I'll just give you like one. Here's a historical thing, and I don't, Elon can decide what he wants to do on this, but there was a time, like about 10 years ago, there was a time when Twitter actually had an API, right? And meaning that basically you could actually build apps on top of Twitter, like you could actually like extend Twitter as a developer. They were kind of turning it into an open system.
And they closed it.
And then they closed
Yeah,
it. Yeah, they shut it down.
You had a lot of good apps, yeah, and it just died.
They killed it, right? And and it goes back to the thing we were talking about before of this kind of oscillation pendulum that goes back and forth between like centralized and decentralized. And so they were starting to open it up and make it more decentralized, and then they decided to kind of shove it back to be totally centralized. Jack has talked publicly about this Blue Sky effort, and he's got other kinds of things that he's working on. To maybe have a decentralized kind of thing. There are other people working on new kinds of decentralized systems like this.
And I think you invested in a platform called DeSo as well.
Yeah, and then also, I'll give a shout out. Farcaster would be another one. So, crypto native, publish subscribe model, and inherently open. Where anybody can build there's already Farcaster's not that large yet, but it's got like a lot of developer activity for the size that it's at, and people can build apps, and there's a lot of creativity happening in that. There's more creativity happening in the Farcaster developer ecosystem than there is in the Twitter developer ecosystem, because of the fact that it is actually open and you can actually extend it. And so, maybe there's something that can be done there. That would be like the code equivalent of free speech. Letting developers create things. And so maybe I'll generalize this out. I would hope in the next 10 or 20 years, I would hope the big internet companies, the big software systems that get built, I would hope that they're more open than they've been.
Before I go to other panelists, what would you say? I've got two questions. What would you say is Achilles' heel for the current strategy by Elon? Is it advertisers, the advertiser revolt, or could be too little censorship?
I don't know. I wouldn't. I'm glad we're betting behind him. I wouldn't bet against him. He makes. I guess I'll just use his words. I think it was actually in your stream. I think in your space, where he said, the thing about doing controversial things is that if you're doing them on behalf of the people, right, then you have an inherent level of like moral authority, and then the people who want to stop you are basically acting against the people. And I think there's a lot to that. Like, I think there's a lot of substance to that, and I think that's what he's doing. So, I think as long as he stays kind of true north on that, I think I mean, he'll have any number of challenges, but I think it's going to be hard for him to not be able to deliver.
I'm getting some good questions from the audience. I know panelists have their hands up, but they're just too good of questions. So one of them is, if Elon proves the current model with Twitter, I know we're talking about a lot about Elon and Twitter, but hey, we're using Twitter. If it proves the current model, do you see other social platforms follow suit? That's question number one. And then question number two is Jordan Peterson coming out against anonymous accounts. I think you supported free speech for anon accounts. I could be wrong. I think I was going through your tweets. So would love your take on pseudo anonymity, because that's obviously a sexy thing right now in Web3.
Yeah. So in the first question, I'll just say that like I said, every tech CEO I talk to, including the social media ones and also the non-social media ones, like they're all watching this whole thing very closely. And I think they're generally, I would say, rooting for him and hoping that his different approaches prove out. And then they're all thinking and talking of like, okay, like if he can do these things, maybe I can do these things. And so he's blazing a trail that I think a lot of people are paying attention to, and I certainly think that as he proves these things out, I think some of his ideas will be picked up by other companies. Look on anonymity. Yeah, so I think Jordan's great, but I do disagree with him on this. Look, freedom of speech. My understanding of freedom of speech, whether you have a sort of a legal understanding or whether you just have like a moral and ethical understanding, is like it's not limited to people who use their real name, and very specifically there, like in the American tradition, it's very
Federalist Papers.
Federalist
right?
Papers.
The Federalist Papers are written anonymously or published anonymously. It's only until later that they started adding their names to the signatories at the bottom.
That's exactly right. And so there's a book I always recommend on this, which is just a fantastic book. It's called Infamous Scribblers, written by this guy, Eric Burns, and he reconstructs what the media environment was actually like in the American colonial period leading up to the American Revolution and after. including the Federalist Papers. And he actually goes through in detail what actually newspapers were like in those days, because newspapers were like a super central thing to the media environment back then. And the newspapers in that whole era, they were filled with people writing in pseudonyms. And in fact, he tells the story in the book that Ben Franklin kind of first became famous and entered politics by being a newspaper publisher. He was trying to sell newspapers, and he was trying to argue out all these ideas. And so he actually at one point had 15 different pseudonyms that he would write under, and he would actually set his pseudonyms against each other in these kind of pitched arguments, right?
Oh, that's brilliant.
Right, and so he would have these furious debates, right? And it's actually one guy writing the whole thing, but he's kind of pushing all of these different ideas and then stress testing them, in public by having these kind of debates between his different pseudonyms. And then there were lots of other people writing in his newspaper and other newspapers who would join the debates. And so, like, I mean, quite honestly, it worked for Ben Franklin. Like, I think it should work for us. And I think anonymous and pseudonymous speech should be on an equal tier with people with real names.
I agree on that one. Now, last question I promised for the other panelists. That's a tough one from the audience, Marc. Do you think there's a chance that Facebook, Instagram, or other social platforms also censored political groups? It's a really tough question. Hope you can answer it.
Yeah, I have a total pass on this one. I'm on the board, so
I thought so. Yeah. I gave it. Look, you can't blame it. I gave it a try, man. It's decentralized. Someone asked that question. It's a decentralized space, so I blame them. Blame decentralization. Alex
I
V,
got questions
to you,
first before.
Okay, go ahead, bro.
So I got some questions earlier from Catherine Brodsky. I think you know her. She asks, first question: Clubhouse versus Spaces. How do you think they play together?
Yeah, I'm gonna also pass on that one. It's a situation where we're involved on both sides, and so nice. I am an enthusiastic supporter of both companies.
I'm the nice guy. I had that question and I skipped it, Marc. So I'm not that bad.
Yeah. And the second question, I think you probably could answer to this one, is you're playing with the Chat GPT earlier today with all your AI essays. Have you learned anything from it? Like what's the takeaway from AI generated content?
Yeah, and I should also disclose, this is going to get boring if I keep saying it, but we're a small investor in OpenAI. So we have a little bit of a vested interest here.
Marc, you gotta invest less so we can ask you more questions.
I know.
so we can pick your brain.
On a broader note, like what's your opinion of like AI and its the role that it plays in society?
Yeah, because I heard you speak. I heard you speak to Joe Rogan about Sentinel AI as well. That was a really good discussion for anyone that wants to check it out. But go ahead.
Yeah, so look, this is a huge moment. This is a breakthrough moment, right? And so the way to think about it is like there was, I'll give you a slightly longer explanation on this. So AI is an idea that started around the same time as the creation of the computer. It's actually Alan Turing who kind of first came up with a lot of the core ideas around AI. And this is like in the early 1940s. And then there were, lots of smart people who worked on all these kind of AI ideas and neural networks. And so forth, all the way through basically from the 40s, all the way through into basically the early 2010s, and actually had very little to show for it. And so, when I was entering college in '89 in the computer science program at Illinois, there had been a huge AI kind of boom in the 80s that had fizzled out because they couldn't ever quite get the stuff to work right. And so there were actually researchers and scientists who spent their entire careers trying to get AI to work and literally were never able to do it. It basically turns out they were on the right track the whole time. They basically didn't have the right infrastructure. The computers weren't fast enough. They didn't have big enough data sets. And then there was just a lot of work to be done in the algorithms. And then there was this big breakthrough in 2012, which was computers being able to recognize objects and images. And that's what led to sort of all the enthusiasm around things like self-driving cars. And then there was this big breakthrough in computer-generated art, which is, only like a year ago now or something, where it started to work really well. Right. Exactly. And then natural language processing has been moving. I think the natural language breakthroughs were like 2 or 3 years ago where it started to get really good in both directions. Like if you use like speech synthesis, if there's like apps, on the iPhone that'll like read documents to you, like the voices got much better, like all at once. And so like that stuff's getting really good. Natural language recognition, like Google Assistant's probably the best at that right now, I think. Where if you talk to it, like it's incredibly good. Or YouTube, you see this with YouTube automated closed captioning.
I use
like
scripts. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we have this company Descript that is doing this for production, and like this stuff has gotten really good. Like we're at the point where computers are basically as good at the computers are as good as people are at recognizing human speech, and almost certainly better at this point.
Yeah, it's a 99% accuracy for all the stuff
Yeah, so
I feed it
it's a
into it.
huge
Yeah.
advance. Like it's a huge advance. And so and then GPT-2 and GPT-3 were big advances.
Yep.
Chat GPT is what they call GPT 3.5, which is an intermediate release. They have GPT-4 in the wings, which I think is going to be a significant advance. Even again here pretty quick. And then now they have the chatbot interface. And it's just, I mean, look, it's amazing what the thing can do. In a lot of ways, probably the most surprising thing to me using it is that it's even better at writing fiction than it is at nonfiction. And so if you ask it to write a screenplay or a stage play or a song or rap lyrics or a sonnet, or a limerick, like it's just incredibly good.
Ask it to write Shakespearean stuff, and it will literally put out Shakespearean sonnets. It's insane how good it is.
But Marc, doesn't that scare you at all? Because you've been a lot more optimistic when you had a fireside chat with Peter, and he was a bit more. Him and Elon are a bit more critical. Is there any fear that AI could eventually replicate itself, and we could embed conscious into it somehow?
Yeah, no. So I don't think so. I don't think that's how this stuff works. So let me say the following, which is like I do think that these algorithms are going to pass what's known as the Turing test.
Yeah,
I think they're quite close now, and so I think that GPT at some point here is going to pass the Turing test pretty definitively. Where if you define the Turing test basically as the simplified version of the Turing test, basically is you're chatting with something that might be a person or might be a machine, and you can't tell the difference. When you have a conversation, at the end of it, you take a guess as to whether it's a person or a machine, and you're like wrong half the time.
It's already there in video games, right? Like like in what is it, like these turn-based strategy games or real-time strategy games, like the stuff that Blizzard makes. It can be extremely hard to tell that you're playing against an AI because it's insanely smart. It's learning from actual players and how they they plot out their moves, their strategies, their build orders, and all that stuff. So sometimes players will be going up against these really hard AI, and they won't even realize it's a player, right? I mean, won't even realize it's an AI.
Yeah, but yes, exactly. But having said that, I think the Turing test is malformed. I've never really thought the Turing test is the right test to apply. And the reason is because human beings are too easy to fool, right? Like,
yeah, right.
Like we're not that smart, and then like we're relatively easy to trick, right? And there are cons and scams and all kinds of things where people get tricked every day, right? So like I don't think that's a fit. Like that, just because you can trick a human does not mean you've achieved sentience or consciousness, in my view. The tip off on this, on how far we are, is the following. And this is why when I talked to Rogan, I was talking about this case that happened where there was this guy who left Google and said that they had a chat bot that had become sentient. And and what one of his claims was, he said, I know it's sentient because when I asked it if it wanted to die, it said no, right? And it expressed the fact that it was like afraid to die. It didn't want me to turn it off. And it's like, that's exactly what a living thing would do. By the way, you can do that. GPT will do that. You can engage in a conversation. You can ask it these questions. You have to they have some guardrails on it, but if you get past the guardrails, you can kind of engage in this conversation, and it will assure you that it's sentient, and it will assure you that it doesn't want to die. You can, however, also have it explain to you how it's not sentient and it's not conscious, and it doesn't care whether you turn it off.
Yeah, ask him about its creators, and it will give you a pretty canned answer.
Yeah, and so it basically it doesn't have an opinion. Like it doesn't know one way or the other if it's conscious. It doesn't have it has no intrinsic motivation. It has no sense of its own self. The Descartes, I think, therefore I am. Like it has no sense of that. And the reason it has no sense of that is like that's not how it's designed, right? What it's designed to do is a very specific thing. It's designed to basically study the sum total of all human written information, process it, and then basically play it back to us. And it plays it back to us in these really elegant, creative ways. But it's math, right? It's a math engine. Like it's doing a linear algebra, like at its core. Math does not just suddenly come alive. Like that's not how things work. And so this idea that it all of a sudden kind of becomes conscious just as a process of like organic bottom-up development, like I just don't see it. And I think the bar on either thinking that will happen or thinking that we even know how to do that, I think is much higher than people think.
It's like science fiction at that point, right?
Alex,
so I actually have two questions regarding AI. I don't want to jump off on that and then get back on it. So sorry for the wait, Alex. My first question is, given the recent developments in AI in terms of like Chat GPT and Midjourney, and there are ramifications of creators, right? Especially for those who refuse to use these tools to, in their own creations. So, and there's been this push, especially on a lot of these closed platforms, where they're banning people from using, from submitting AI generated art and things like that. Uh, what are your predictions for creators in the future with the advent of all these tools? And it's getting to a point where, something like Midjourney, you can't tell if a person actually drew it or if like a computer came up with it based on a prompt. So what are your predictions for creators in the future for this?
Yeah, so the big question on this kind of thing that I think people generally orient around is, when the computer gets really good at doing something like creating art, generating art, is that sort of displacing work that would have been done by human artists on the one hand,
Right. Yeah.
right? Or, right, is that giving human artists superpowers where they can now generate much more and maybe better art than they could in the past?
Yeah.
Right. And so the way technology plays out over time, there's sort of there's this thing that people talk about called the lump of labor fallacy, which is kind of this idea that if computers do the work, then we don't need people anymore. It's the same concern that was brought up about the automated spinning loom in textiles. It's the same concern that was brought up with the steam engine. It's the same concern that was brought up with mechanical plows in the field, in agriculture. It's the same concern that was brought up with the computer when it first came out.
Yeah, replace calculators, and those replace people doing manual arithmetic. Yeah.
Actually, it's so a great example here is the word computer originally did not refer to a machine; it referred to a person.
Right.
Right. And so if you go back in time, if you go back before the invention of the computer in like 1920s, 1930s, what computer actually meant was it meant like 100 people sitting at rows of desks doing math by hand. Right. And literally it was a profession. And like insurance companies to calculate like actuarial tables, they actually would employ these people who were human computers doing math by hand. And then those jobs went away because the computer does that better. But what happens on the other side is the computer became a superpower for people to be able to use to do many other kinds of things, and in particular, more valuable and higher impact kinds of things. And so
Elon,
I think
Elon's just
Elon's here, by the way, Marc. Just letting you know as well.
Sure.
Hey guys.
Yeah. Good.
Hey.
Hey, Elon.
How's it going?
It's going good overall. How are you guys doing?
Fantastic.
Good.
Great to have
Talking
you.
about,
Amazing.
talking about AI and whether we should be scared or not. Marc is pretty optimistic about it.
Well, I think we should be. I think a mixture of positive and negative sentiment, I think, is probably wise. Like, we should be concerned about AI going wrong, but also it will. I mean, it's going to be amazing and scary, obviously. So some of it is perhaps inevitable. So you may as well, if something is inevitable, might as well focus on the positive side.
We discussed as well earlier, we were having a chat about your tweets and your transparency. Like I asked Marc, is Elon just strategic with his tweets? And then Marc answered pretty openly, like, look, man, anything Elon tweets reflects our discussions 100%. So like we're seeing what you're doing on Twitter as an experiment. Everyone's looking at as an experiment. How's it going so far? Are you enjoying the response?
Yeah, I think overall it's good. There's it's going to be it's a roller coaster, so there's going to be some ups and downs. As long as the long-term trend is up, it's going to be good. And I think Twitter is trending in a positive direction. Like we're seeing a lot more engagement, and anecdotally, and also in the sort of user average minutes. Like we're seeing like higher user engagement. People are saying it's more fun. But what do you guys think?
Fun. Oh, it's way more fun. I love it. I love it. It's like I log on every day and it's just pure entertainment. Thank you.
And Marc's answer was really interesting. He said that everyone's looking at it. Marc, I'll let you actually. What was your answer to the question? Like, how's the response of other platforms and other players in the space on the complete transparency by Elon on Twitter?
Yeah, so I've told Elon this already, but yeah, no, I mean, look, every other tech CEO I talk to is watching this whole thing like a hawk. and they're all learning on the fly, watching what's happening, and they're all like, I would say, very carefully taking notes and trying to figure out how they can use the results of Elon's work and figure out how to apply to their own companies.
Elon, I've got a
You're
question
welcome.
for you before I go to Alex.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've got questions for you too. Yeah.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
I'll ask my question, then we go to Ian and Alex. Elon, my question is about spaces. Where do you see spaces in the next, let's say, 6 to 12 months?
Well, Spaces works better than I anticipated because I was like, is this thing actually worth it or not?
Can I say
Hell yeah.
do I have the right to say you're welcome or no? Too early.
You know, sure. Thanks.
No, joking.
We'll save it for
yeah,
when
no,
he does Tesla
Spaces is
earnings.
actually clearly way better than I thought. And I like the fact that sort of you're on Twitter and then it shows that Spaces is active with people that you follow and stuff, and you can just hop in and talk. You know, just off the cuff. It's pretty cool. I think we need to be like better about like saving interesting spaces and making them easier to find. So
Yeah. There's no way to search.
Yeah, exactly. It should be on search. So like, you know, it's like if you say like the top 1% of Spaces conversations of the year is probably epic, you know.
Yeah.
So, and I think there should be like Spaces internationally and have you know, Spaces internationally and get that translated. That would be like a future cool thing.
There should probably be a way to save, to save conversations and a way to even search those, right? Because right now, the only way to do that is to, you know, like Kim.com had a bunch of really great spaces, but the only way to search for them is to go through his timeline, and, you know, it can be hard to find.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We need to make them easy to find. In general, search on Twitter is terrible, and we need to make it much better.
What's working well, Elon, not sure if you saw that earlier, like we've done a lot of spaces, we're testing different things. What's working really well is breaking news. So whenever something happens, I've got my team watching everything 24/7. They wake me up. That seems to be working best, you know, because it's so different to podcasts and YouTube streams. So breaking news, and we were thinking about trying to cover the World Cup as well. We didn't do it eventually, but that was one of the things we were looking at doing. Ian, did you have any other questions before we go to the panel?
Yes. So, you know, you were at the Dave Chappelle thing a couple of days ago, and there was this, you know, this narrative is that you've been booed by everyone. And when I say everyone, I'm putting that in quotes. And it's like it should be obvious to everybody that it wasn't everyone. What kind of reception did you actually receive?
Yeah, I mean, okay, I mean, this is just my perception standing on the stage. And like, you know, I'm friends with Chappelle and with Chris, and I've known them for a long time, especially Dave. And, you know, I've always loved his work. So, you know, we were just like hanging out beforehand, and it's like, well, you know, it would be like totally bizarre if like I came on stage, and they're like, yeah, that's cool, let's do it. And so that was, I really decided to go to the show, or even knew about the show like a few hours beforehand. So then it was just like standing there ad hoc, you know, it was just it's like an interesting situation. Obviously, I made some controversial decisions, especially as viewed by those who live in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And so I wouldn't expect my fan club to be 100%, even at a Chappelle show. So, you know, so then I think there's an interesting sort of group dynamic thing that happens where if like one person starts booing, it sort of encourages others to boo. Yeah. And, you know, and then you get sort of like this weird group dynamic happening. The same thing happens on Twitter, just with text. But I think in retrospect, I should have encouraged the booing and said like, come on, guys, you call that a boo? Please, try harder. Boo, give me all together now. Boo, come on, you can do it. You can do it. That's a feeble boo. Come on, give us a good belly boo. You know, from the bellow a boo.
Yeah.
I think everyone's cheering that S is in jail right now, though.
Like, boo, 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 boo,
I wanted to ask
boo,
you
boo.
more about that.
Anyway, yeah, SBF definitely needs an adult timeout in the big house, as I said. You know, it's like, come on, man. It's like there are people in prison for like stealing a car for like a $5,000 car, and they're in prison. That's if someone's like runs off with like billions of dollars, it's like they should do some time. It's not right that others who steal smaller things should be in prison and they're not. You know, I don't think we need to like, you know, have the guy be in prison for life, but he should, you know.
He probably will be.
Yeah, I doubt it.
Yeah, maybe not. I don't know.
I doubt it. I mean, but but it should obviously it would be an outrage if there was no punishment. And so like some number of years of in being stuck in a all expenses paid federal vacation, and look on the bright side, and and then it's whatever, pays penalty to society, actually genuinely be sorry, and then they let it, then he can rejoin society.
I think he's going to feel pretty bad because he won't be able to play any League of Legends while in prison, and that seems to be his number one
He
hobby.
sucks at it anyway.
He does suck at it. Yeah.
Did you see Elon? Did you see the narrative on TV by a few high-profile individuals that were, supportive of Sam in some ways? Is Sam just a really good manipulator with his interviews? Do you think there's some truth? Not sure if you've heard his recent interviews. Could it be a mistake, or just it's his bullshit meter went off again?
Listen, I don't know. No matter how you cut it, the dude has not been honest with people's money and stole them a bunch of money. Like, this is no other way to interpret that. Like, obviously, there's got to be some appropriate punishment here. That is, I actually don't think it should be like life in prison or whatever, but it shouldn't be nothing. I'm not the judge, but like 5 years to 10 years, something.
Maybe. Might be too little compared to Bernie Madoff, right? He got 150 years.
Yeah, I think Bernie Madoff, they're basically saying like, this guy's, unless he is Methuselah, he's not gonna, the actual number of years doesn't matter that much because he's pretty old. So SBF's not that old, so he could actually spend 50 years in prison.
Yeah,
but should he spend 50 years in prison? Probably that's too much. I'm not afraid. I'm not.
It
the
seems
judge
to me
here,
he's very young, right? I mean, he should have a chance to make mistakes, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm the judge, I would say like 5 years with good behavior. I'm not the who am I? I'm not the judge. 10 years if you're not doing 10 years with bad behavior. Like 5 years if you do your best to actually get the money back, and aren't a phony asshole about it, and then 10 years if you hide the money, or longer if you actually hide the money.
Doesn't that feel too lenient, Elon? Like if it was only 5 years, I would go attempt it. Like not actually, but like you know what I'm saying.
Like I said, I'm not the judge here. I'm like what I know. But it's a best case. It shouldn't be less than that. But probably not life either. Like. It's like serious punishment, but give the guy some chance of repentance and a comeback.
So I have a question, and this one's from Kristen Ruby. I think you tweeted at her the other day when she was getting some inside leaks from some engineer at Twitter. She's asking, and I'm asking this too, has the AI been retrained? Because right now, I mean, based on the leaks, we have all this information that was basically automatically censoring people through the algorithm. And since you've taken over, have you guys like retrained it so it's not so censorious?
We have made some changes to the algorithm, but not. I mean, they're relatively subtle. I think my instructions to the team is like just show people interesting stuff, and that the right metric I think to focus on is maximize the number of unregretted user minutes. So, and like if you're going to focus on any metric, I think that's the right one. Because so like a frequent criticism I hear of TikTok is that I spent like 2 hours on TikTok, but I regret it, and so we don't want that, So if you have unregretted user minutes, that's it can be a little nebulous to figure that out, but that's I think the right thing to aspire to. And unregretted user minutes are where you learned things, you were entertained, it was funny. You're not going to regret those minutes,
Yeah, absolutely.
I see your hand up, Eric. Eric, you got to unmute, otherwise we'll go to Brian. Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, hey Elon. I was just wondering, is there a possibility that in the future you could decentralize the database of Twitter, or at least open it up so others could build upon it? Like I feel that it could maybe be a solution to the whole censorship debate. If like Twitter was, you ban or block somebody on their front end, another front end like brianstwitter.com could then tie into the database and bring it up, that content up at my own risk.
Maybe. I don't know. There are various like other ways to view Twitter besides the Twitter client. But I'm like open to a lot of different ideas to evolve Twitter over time. The sort of the short term actions have obviously been just like let's just get the company to financially healthy position, especially given that like we're headed into a recession and advertising will be disproportionately affected, especially advertising where you can't make a clear ROI argument. And like weirdly, this is gonna blow your mind. Twitter for the longest time was really had the advertising engine was maximizing irrelevance. That will actually resonate with you if you have noticed that for most long-time Twitter users have never bought a product ever on Twitter. And you have to say like, well, doesn't that seem a little strange? Because why wouldn't you have accidentally bought a product on Twitter? It's because the advertising has been maximizing irrelevance. So why would it maximize relevance? Because a lot of the ads traditionally at Twitter were sold on a cost per impression basis, and if you do that, you actually don't want people to dwell on or click into an ad because it will reduce the total number of impressions. So you actually want the ads to be as irrelevant as possible, so that you get the most number of, in quotes, impressions. And roughly 25% of Twitter's entire compute budget is spent on maximizing irrelevance, or at least it was until a few weeks ago, where we started to turn the ship in that regard significantly. So you might actually in the last week or two possibly have bought or even thought about buying a product from an ad that you saw on Twitter. So it took me a while to actually even understand this, and because there was like head exploding emoji, I cannot freaking believe that we would spend 25% of the compute budget on, it's like roughly 130,000 servers, maximizing irrelevance. But it makes total sense if you think about your Twitter usage, because I bet most people here on this call have never bought anything on Twitter, or if they did, it was only in recent weeks. And that's why, because it was actually very good at making sure that the ad was not relevant.
Wow.
The sheer amount of Mike Judge comedy material that we have is insane. In fact, so Mike Judge is a friend of mine, and he lives just outside Austin.
I love his films.
Yeah, he is awesome. So I like texted Mike and said, "Hey, Mike, we got some epic material for some new show if you want to do it." And so hopefully Mike Judge comes by Twitter. He said he might come by like next month or something. So that'd be cool.
Make a series out of it.
Yeah, like honestly, we've got enough material for like many seasons here.
Running a social media company from the ground up, from the Jack days.
Yeah, I just love that the media has to come here just to get their talking points. It's amazing. And that you keep coming to spaces, so they have to come here rather than you going to the media. It's perfect.
Our spaces. I love it. Thanks, Elon. You're the best.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's quite entertaining. Arguably the worst thing you can make is to be boring. That's
you do a good job at not being boring.
Yeah,
I will actually
problematic nowadays.
I'm really knocking it out of the park and not being boring.
I've got a tough question for you. Elon, what would you say is your biggest concern, if there is one, on your current strategy with Twitter, on the free speech strategies? My guess will be advertisers.
Yeah, we did have some advertisers pause because they're like, a lot of them are kind of conservative and they're like worried about like, because for a lot of advertisers, they're like basing their decisions off what they read in the press as opposed to what is the platform actually doing, Mm-hmm. And so that's why I was like, okay. So I've had a lot of calls with the big advertisers and said like, look, you should just base your opinion on Twitter of what you see on Twitter, not what you read in the newspaper. And in some ways, Twitter and the newspapers are competing because the newspapers competing or on the mainstream media is competing for your attention. Twitter's competing for your attention. So there's an attention competition here. So you got to be like, when you're reading in the media, other media, you're actually reading, think about it, like a competitor's opinion of Twitter. And then you're like, oh, okay, maybe that's not true, you know? So that's why I said they should judge it by their actual experience on Twitter. And I think actual experience on Twitter is that things have improved dramatically. That's my observation. And even in the last
positive. It's so much more positive nowadays. You know, I mean, like people are
Yeah.
actually having fun. They're joining spaces. I've seen so many spaces prop up, and it's just people having, you know, chats about nothing, and it's fine, right? Like they love
Yeah.
having chats. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, and I mean, some people would take themselves too seriously. They get like, you know, knickers
Yeah.
in a knot type of thing. And it's like, but you know, and then they do that on Twitter, and they like go on a tirade and whatever, which is fine. Do it on Twitter. That's cool.
Increases user
I love
engagement.
it when people complain about Twitter on Twitter.
Yeah. They're not doing it on Mastodon or, you know, whatever site they're going to. It's on
because
Twitter.
it's too boring because no one's listening.
Yeah. They're screaming into the void.
Yeah, it's screaming into the void. Like, just go into an empty room and complain. The complainers have to have somebody. They have to complain to someone, you know.
Yeah.
That,
We got the
there's the
audience here.
irony in them tweeting about leaving Twitter. Like, do they not see the irony?
No,
Yeah,
Apparently not.
they don't. So I
Yeah.
actually have a super good question from Kristen. It's a follow-up to the last one. She asked regarding the data she's reviewing, you know, that was leaked by a former person at Twitter. I don't think they work there anymore. It shows, you know, it showed clear bias in the AI towards conservatives. How can you ensure that the AI won't be used in this way moving forward, like for political, you know, for censoring political speech? And based on the data that was leaked, do you believe that political bias existed regarding how Twitter was monitored, how it monitored political misinformation? So that's like two questions, I guess.
Well, first of all, Twitter's AI is extremely primitive, so I wouldn't read too much into it.
Okay.
I think we will improve AI. Oh my God, this is not really a word we should be using for the Twitter algorithm. Okay, that's not the case. It's really a very, very simple ML that Twitter is using. If I compare it to, say, like Tesla Autopilot, oh my God, it's like orders of magnitude simpler. So we will improve that a lot over time. And like I said, our goal is going to be maximize undergraded user minutes. So you're like maximally informed and entertained. And it'll be good to expose people to different points of view, you know, so you don't just, I mean, hopefully people are, you know, open to that or become more open to that over time. It's like, at least listen to the arguments from the other side and don't just demonize them and assume that everything they say is just evil. You know, I think people should be open to having their mind changed once in a while, and or at least understanding those they oppose better. You know, what's the harm in that? At least understanding those with different viewpoints. That seems like a good thing. And you can still disagree with them afterwards, but at least you know you know where they're coming from. But obviously, historically, I'm just stating, anyone who was a casual observer of Twitter, that Twitter was extremely heavily biased towards the left. The Twitter wasn't just drinking the Kool-Aid; it was swimming in the Kool-Aid.
It was pumping out the water.
It was like,
you know,
it's like asking the fish, like, hey, do you see water? Like, what water? Like, you're in it, man. it's all water.
In a similar vein, Sebastian Gorka here, Mr. Musk. It's been reported that you want to turn Twitter into like a super app like WeChat. Would you address concerns of those who say that's very exciting, but to prevent that abuse in a similar vein we've seen in China, especially if you're not running Twitter, what do you say to those who worry that could be abused?
Well, I mean, that's like honestly a high-class problem because we've got a long way to go before we're at you know, anywhere like that. But I do think the succession problems are a real issue because it matters who's running the place, you know. But I can say, like, okay, like the things I can only do the things that are within my control. Like I'm trying to say, like, what set of actions can I do that are, you know, maximally useful, and that'll be to make Twitter more and more useful, more and more entertaining. Doing the dead nuts obvious stuff like adding long form video, monetization for creators.
Yes, please.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer. The stuff's like no-brainer moves, you know.
Are you working with anyone on this? Like any big YouTubers are contributing? I mean, I'm sure they have a lot of ideas.
I mean, the key is I've just got to get the engine of engineering at Twitter working. So because you can have a million good ideas, but if you can't implement them from a software standpoint, it doesn't matter.
Right.
So it's like I said, most of the stuff that needs to be done is extremely obvious, and I think frankly like a 12-year-old could tell you what needs to happen. You know, it's not like you don't need Einstein here.
No.
But we need to actually have be able to evolve the software rapidly so that good ideas can actually be implemented. And the software stack at Twitter is a Django pile of insanity. If anyone has actually been exposed to it, it's like, holy smokes. This is not an easy thing to evolve. That's why simple features take a long time.
Is this something that you would consider, crowdsourcing by opening up the API?
No, it's not about opening. We've got to fix the fundamental core stack.
Oh, okay. The basic stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, like there's a. I won't bore everyone. In fact,
Go ahead.
I've got a sorry, Tesla. Speaking of Tesla, I have a Tesla meeting that I'm late for. I have to step off.
Oh boy.
I'll ask you before you start, Elon, I have one last question. Actually, two quick questions. First, about your White Rabbit tweet. A lot of people are DMing me about this. I haven't seen it, so I'm not sure what it's about. And then the second one, which I always yeah, so that's the first one, and then the second one should be a very easy one. We're doing a COVID
Elon,
space, getting a lot of.
Get a question in about Tesla because I'm very concerned as an investor.
Guys, he's got to go.
We gotta go. Eric, Elon jumps in all the time. Eric, I promise you I'll invite you next time he's in. Elon, if I bring Fauci to the space, we're talking to his team. We're getting a whole bunch of doctors. If I do, shit, he dropped out. Fuck. I wanted to ask him. Yeah, I wanted to ask him if he'll.
He already left at that point. Yeah.
I wanted to ask him about if we bring in Fauci, if we can get him to come on. I'll DM him about
I'm sure
this.
He'll say yes.
For anyone listening, just quickly, Ian, quick, Ian, 2 seconds, Ian. For anyone listening, hold on, guys, 2 seconds. Ian, for everyone listening, pinned tweet on my profile is if you want to join the COVID space. I'll try to get Elon in as well. We're going to try to get Fauci, not in that one, but in a future one. But if you go to pinned tweet on my profile, I'll pin it above as well. You could get notified for that space. Should be a slippery slope, really tough one. Well, that was fucking cool. Getting Marc and Elon in the same space. Yeah. What's your takeaway? You've been on almost every space. You've been on the last space with me and Elon. What's your take on this one, Ian?
Fantastic. I mean, he was very grounded, very based, just answering questions. I mean, it's chill, right? It's chill. That's what these spaces are for. It's not like, like a lot of people are like terrified, like, oh my God, you only get to speak to him once. No, I mean, it is very clear that he intends to use these spaces quite often. This is not the only space he's ever joined. And it's good to have someone who cares so much about his platform that he's like dedicating time to speak to people about the issues that affect this platform, right? I mean, with Jack, no one could get a response out of Jack at any point in time, right? It's only now that even Jack is like responding to people, which is cool. Like, good for Jack. I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing his next projects, and I hope that he follows in Elon's footsteps and like encourages the community to join in and have these conversations. If anything, every like Marc said, right? Every tech CEO is looking at Elon right now and they're seeing, is this strategy working? And I think so. Yeah, it is working.
And I love Marc's discussion as well and his support of Elon's strategy and how he said other social platforms. I don't know if he said that word, but other executives and other players, big players in the space, other executives are watching this. I'm going to call it experiment by Elon, the free speech experiment.
And as I pointed out, like Mark Zuckerberg said at the New York Times book event thing, that he was watching it. He's watching Elon closely. So they're quite open about it.
He said that. Yeah. He said that openly, Marc.
He said that openly,
Marc, I see Marc as a complete opposite, and he gets a lot. Like I don't, obviously I'm indifferent about everyone, but
Sure.
Mark gets a
Hope
lot
you're
of
not indifferent
hate for
about me,
various
Mario.
reasons. But gets a lot of hate. I think one of the reasons is he's very secretive, very private,
Sure.
and not as relatable. Yeah, Elon is on the completely opposite spectrum, and it's just such an interesting dichotomy. And we're seeing that Elon's strategy of being very approachable, jumping to a space, speaking his mind, could backfire at times, but the pros significantly outweigh the cons, and he's
It's
kind
just
of
Mark
practicing
says,
what he preaches
don't
through
bet
free
against
speech.
Elon, right? Don't bet against Elon, right? I mean, he has a plan. I mean, I know it sounds kind of silly, like a bit fanboyish thing. He has a plan, but I mean, look at his track record, right? PayPal, and then Tesla, and then
Bro,
SpaceX.
I was even without the track record, I was critical of Elon's acquisition. I'm like, I wasn't optimistic. I was not even indifferent. I was more, I'm like, it could be troublesome. And then when I saw his aggressive move to free speech, I'm like, ideologically, I support it, but strategically, it just looks scary. And I
In
don't
the
know how he
short
gets the
term, it looks scary. I
balls to
think in
do
the
it.
short, oh yeah, it takes tremendous balls to do it. I mean, in the
It's
short term, yeah, it looks
insane.
Yeah.
scary, but in the long term, it does make a lot of sense. I mean, his goal, and this is my opinion, right? But he has stated this quite openly. Like his goal for his vision for like humanity and the future that it offers requires a free speech platform. And the way that Twitter was going, the way it was controlling speech, and let's be honest here. I mean, Twitter may not be the largest platform, but it is the most influential platform. This is where all the journalists are. This is where all the politicians are. Things happen on Twitter before their
Ian,
news.
Ian, we had, just to give you two examples. First, we just had Marc Andreessen
Yeah.
Horowitz, and Elon just come on and just chat
Yeah.
to us in a space
Exactly.
live, and
This would
Elon
be a
just,
news story, right? So it
eh,
could be
eh,
multiple news stories. Yeah.
man, like, where else can you find this? That's the beauty about
Nowhere.
spaces. And then the way we break news, you remember when we did the FTX, I think you said you were in some of these spaces.
Yep, I was.
The journalists, yeah, the journalists were in our space, and then we see the reports come out by Bloomberg. We've got so many examples. After we break them in the space, like the block story, how FTX funded the block, Sam Alameda gave money to the CEO of the block. That news broke 4 days ago. If people were in our space and they connected with one of the whistleblowers, they knew about this months ago, and it was in the data room. We were talking about this yesterday, I think. So I know Elon called it. I think it was Elon or someone called it citizen journalism.
Yeah, it was Elon. Yeah, called it that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, when he first jumped into the space, it's actually like, I thought it was a cool term, but I'm like, yeah, I don't know how true that is. But it is.
Though. But it is a term. Yeah, it's a good
Yeah,
term.
it is.
And he's
No,
popularizing
yeah.
it. He's 100% popularizing it.
And it's working. Like, not only is it a cool, sexy term, it's genuinely working. And more, I go through the audience all the times.
Yep.
Every single outlet, I've seen it in the audience at least once. And the top outlets from BBC to Reuters, they talk to us all the time. Yesterday, Washington Post, New York Times all the time, Fox are here all the time.
I love Fox.
They're always here, and I see the reports going out right after we talk about it, and they obviously DM us, and they wait for the recording to come out. So every time, and I kind of piss them off because they're like waiting for the recording, and they're like, guys, I'm not going to end it for you guys, and it goes on for another 10 hours, and they're waiting and waiting because they need to verify.
Right? Because they're very entitled. I mean, they have this 9 to 5.
No, but they need to verify as well. I'll give them credit.
Of
so what we
course.
do now is like we record it
some of them
separately. We record it separately and send it out to them. But like the experiment of Twitter Spaces, even Elon said, like, he's surprised by how it's going. The experiment is working. It could become a highlight of Twitter, and that's why I'm investing so much time and effort, and we have a whole team doing it.
And this is just
it seems to be going
the
well.
start, right? I mean, like as he said, he has to work the core functionality of Twitter, and that's what they're working on right now. That's the reason why we haven't seen too many new features yet, and that's all coming to Twitter Blue first, obviously. But we're going to see a lot of this, moving forward. Like 6 months from now, Twitter could look like a completely different place. It could have videos on it. It could have playlists, stuff that creators are just going to flock to because that's where their audience is anyway. Like, most people are not on YouTube 24/7. Maybe some people are, but most people are not, right? And imagine having direct, coordination with your creators. You're telling them, "Hey, go make this," and they go and create something. Say the musicians, for instance, they will do that, and doing it live on a space. I mean, that's the future, for creation.
Yeah,
and imagine that. Go ahead, Steve.
Ian, don't you guys remember? This is hardly the first time that critics of Elon have claimed doom and gloom over his business style, business practices.
And SpaceX, right? You got no experience building a spacecraft. What are you doing? It's like, well, the foundation's already there. It's just a matter of commercializing it. And sure enough, he's the number one right now.
And Ian, I'm sure you remember when Elon first went on Joe Rogan and smoked a doobie on there. Tesla stock did go down for a couple days temporarily, and then we had all the business journals come out and say Tesla's done. We need new leadership. This guy's out of control. This isn't professional, et cetera, et cetera. Well, look, and Tesla went on to ascend to all-time highs, repeatedly since then. So,
Look what happened to Apple when they kicked out Steve Jobs. That is not a good idea. If they kick out Elon Musk, it's game over.
Pretty much.
But if this experiment by Elon works, I'd be fascinated to see if other social platforms follow suit, because then they'd be under pressure. If the experiment ends up being a success.
And it's a good thing, right? Because he is showing that this experiment in free speech is going to work. And it's already working, despite the negative press, despite all that. Where are they complaining about it? They're complaining about it on Twitter. Right, of all places, they're not complaining about it on Mastodon or anywhere else. They're complaining about it on here because, as he said, shouting to the void, it's just hilarious. Nobody wants to do that. It's an empty room. It's pathetic. Think about it. Just a guy shouting into an empty space. That nobody wants that. They need an audience, and they're narcissists. Sorry for you guys in the audience who are narcissists. But yeah.
Grant, I think I see you jump in.
Yeah. Hey, great room, guys. Great job on what you guys are doing here. So,
thank you.
It's curious to me. Every time anybody asks an engineering question to him, he almost chuckled more tonight than he did 3 or 4 nights ago, and to where it's laughable. And I just wonder what that says about Jack.
It says that he wasn't running a tight ship, if anything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds to me like there's nothing here. There's nothing there.
It's very
basic. Platform has to be rebuilt.
Yeah, like I asked him about APIs, right? And he's like, he just laughed at that joke, and it's like, okay,
yeah, exactly.
It's clearly not ready for any of that, not yet. Yeah.
So we're moving a bunch of our ad dollars after I heard him on his plane. I don't know, I guess a week ago now.
Yep.
We started moving ad dollars off of Google and Facebook onto Twitter to support him and content. But it's almost like, are they even ready for content providers to bang away here?
Right.
And that's what I was hoping to ask you.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, like, I advertise on Twitter, and it's like, it's kind of not worth it. It's better to do it on TikTok because it actually gives me options of who I want to target, what their demographics are. Twitter doesn't offer any of that. It's not very good. It's very random, right? So give it a few months, I would say. That's probably what they're building right now. I mean, it is what they're building right now. That's what you said. So, yeah.
But spaces are free, and I will tell you, they are the best advertising, of any platform. I would say this is where it's at. I mean, there's really better. And then to have a chance of Elon Musk showing up into your space, which he's been in a few of Mario's now. He's come to one of my spaces. I mean, it's just going to keep going. And like Ian said, he's going to continue to use this platform to grow this platform. And it makes sense. Why go do interviews with the media who is just constantly bashing you? Why go give them views and clicks when you can just come here to the people who support you?
It's the perfect middle finger. I love it. Yeah, it's the perfect middle finger to the media.
Mario, did anybody notice that he zipped up his pants? Did y'all
see
No.
He was getting dressed at the beginning. He was getting dressed. You could hear his zipper pull up. Anybody?
Yeah.
I don't know.
But that's the thing. Like Grant, when I did the space for just for everyone listening, if I did the space for 15 hours hosting it,
$100 billion zipper, man.
But that's the thing, like when you do those spaces, no one has any idea what you're doing in the background. Like some cases you don't want to know what I'm doing in the background when I'm hosting some of these spaces.
I'm eating a snack. I'm eating a snack.
You're innocent, bro. No. Hey, Alex?
Yeah, I was gonna say, as one of like the main people that are hosting these, for a suggestion to Elon.
Oh, you dropped out.
Yo, can you hear me?
Go ahead. Sorry, Alex.
Yeah, you have to repeat that question.
I was going to say, how would you feel as a suggestion to increase the stage size? I know there's the worry about overcrowding, but so I obviously hosted my first space last night, and we were getting so many like big name people in the space that we would like have to, boot like higher named people out. Like we had like Carrie Lake in, Seb Gorka was in, and we're like, we're so sorry, but we have to boot you out for like another person that just joined. What would you feel?
I would say, I'll tell you, yeah. I go through this all the time, as you can guess. I'll tell you, first, don't say boot. When you tell them, say, hey guys, we're rotating the panel. And I do this all the time. I DM people, we're rotating the panel.
Rotating
and then when,
panel.
when someone spoke already, I bring them down, or when the discussion is just not too relevant, and they're generally pretty understanding, but you have to have a team in the background. So I have a team of 6 every time I'm doing a space. Like right now, I have a team of 6, some checking breaking news, some DMing speakers, bringing new speakers up because Twitter glitches all the time, preparing questions for me. Having that team in the back end is key. Especially if you keep doing big spaces, it just and to maintain those relationships, because you don't want to be offensive to people, but at the same time you must rotate a panel to keep the discussion going and give everyone a chance to speak. It's
And
very,
also,
very tricky.
With
It'll be
regard
funny.
to this particular space, we kept it small on purpose because we had a bunch of pointed questions all prepared, and we got to answer. I mean, we got to ask all of them, and that's great, right? I mean, these guys are very busy people, so we didn't want to just bring everybody up and have a long ass conversation that met nowhere, right? We had some
But like,
pointed questions.
and like tomorrow's space about COVID's gonna be a fucking bitch. I don't know how I'm gonna moderate the panel, who I'm gonna bring up. It's gonna be tough. Like when you do
Who's going to be your speakers, Mario, tomorrow? Speakers?
So we have a list of speakers because we're gonna do multiple panels as we go through the Fauci files. We're trying to bring Fauci himself, but we have a list of speakers with all different theories. Tomorrow, I think we have Dr. Drew, and we have another doctor from the board at Pfizer, because they're going to disagree on a lot of points.
If you want to make it really interesting, you've got to have McCullough and Malone now that they're back on Twitter.
Yeah. So we're reaching. I'd love an intro. Anyone that could do these introductions. My team could already.
Do that. I'll do that.
That would be great.
You.
Yeah,
Appreciate
perfect,
that.
Sebastian. Because we may be already in contact. So we're trying to bring a lot of the doctors or medical professionals that were suspended on Twitter initially, trying to bring them onto the space now that they're getting unbanned one after the other. But yeah, any introductions by you, Sebastian, or anyone else would be greatly appreciated to make sure we get all sides of every theory, every story. Brian, go ahead, man.
Yeah, obviously, I'm more left-leaning, so I have different opinions on things. But I've been following Elon, his career, since he was with PayPal back in the early 2000s. And listening to Elon, I don't at all doubt his intentions to try and make Twitter better and more fair and even more unifying. I also don't dispute his right for speaking his mind, even the controversial stuff that I probably disagree with more than a lot of you in here. But I just question, like, is it best for him to post controversial stuff, even if he is posting things leaning towards the left that was controversial? Is that the best way to create a platform that everybody wants to use and everybody wants to engage with? That's the only question I have. Anything else?
I'll take that one, Brian. I'm going to be more objective about it, or more in the middle. I have no idea. Like, we're going to find out, because there's an argument for that, and Marc Andreessen made that point. It's like, hey, at least he's being transparent. At least we're getting his thoughts, which is like the opposite of many others that are keeping things to themselves, and we don't like that either. And now, is it better to be somewhere in the middle? Because obviously Elon is too transparent in some ways, or is full transparency the best solution? Which
I think it's the best idea. I love it.
I'm leaning in that direction as well, but I would say it is an experiment, and I think Marc made that point.
It's scary for really successful people because they're putting a lot on the line, and it shows that Elon is confident in the product, that he can speak like this, that he can speak openly. And this is the same, for Tesla, right? I mean, he was very open about his plans with the company. So I'm not too concerned about it personally.
Obvious question. Who the hell decides what controversial is?
Exactly.
After 5 years of, Russia collusion hoax and Hunter's laptop isn't real. Seriously? Come on. Who gets to decide that? Nobody.
Exactly.
I would argue echo chambers are boring, and by them even banning Trump, they got rid of a lot of people who used to use Twitter very actively just to see the controversy. Even people who hated Trump came to Twitter to see what Trump was saying. So I would argue he's sort of almost taking a page out of that book, but it's just him. He's being himself 100%. And I don't think he should hide that. And I don't like the way that Jack and other previous CEOs of Twitter and social media companies just hide behind this curtain. And you have no idea what their thought process is. So you really don't know why you're getting suspended, why you're getting banned, and come to find out they all have this very left-wing stance. So they're banning anyone who is conservative, which is so wrong. So to just be out in the open with it and then also say, I'm not banning people with a different perspective or different view, but this is how I feel. I think it's really effective, and I think it's bringing people to Twitter in droves. I mean, my follow count has almost doubled since Elon Musk took over a month and a half ago. It's insane.
It's like what Marc said earlier, right? When he talked about this book, The Image, he said that, prior to now, really, people would hold press events and they're all fake, right? Everybody knows it's fake. Everybody knows that the conversations are having, are happening in these smoke-filled rooms, so to speak, right? And that nothing that they say in public is real. It makes people very, cynical. And that is something we have to move away from. We have to move towards sincerity. We have to move towards honesty and truth, because this idea that people just lie and everybody lies, it's just, I mean, look at what it's done to society. And that it's large, society is damaged the way it is. It's messed up the way it is because people have not been honest. I mean, the politicians, when they make promises on the campaign trail, how many of them, even fulfill their obligations to their constituents? None of them do, right? Very few of them actually do. So this openness, this, like what I say is what I'm going to do, and this is Elon's way of dealing as a CEO. It's really refreshing, and I hope more people do it as well, because I'm done with this whole image, this whole we only do things for the sake of optics. Because how can you trust anyone or anything or any institution when people just lie all the time, right? We have to bring.
He said he's not telling the line anymore, right, Ian? That's exactly what he said in Mario's other space. He's been telling the line. And when you can't be bought and they don't have dirt on you, you aren't forced to toe the line.
And the way that Elon is bringing trust back to the space is by being honest. It's by saying what's on his mind. Like as Marc said, this is his leadership style. Everything he says on Twitter is what he'll say in real life to you, to your face, right? So he's bringing that sense of trust back to Twitter. It's making people trust the platform, more than they trust the media. Because I mean, the media, trust in the media is at an all-time low, and that's for obvious reasons. They've lied to us about the Biden laptop. They've lied to us about the Russian collusion, and so many other things. Right? They're lying to us about literally everything. So this is, I feel like this is like a new era, personally, because it shows that people can be open and they can be honest and they can be completely transparent of what they're saying. And if you lie in the future, maybe that will be the outlier. Not to make a pun. That'll be the outlier.
I don't doubt that at all. I guess my question was, like, is it the best business strategy to
in the short term? Maybe not, but in the long term, I would say yeah, it is. It's a new business strategy. It's one that has not been tried.
We'll see, right?
Alex?
Yeah, to your point, I would say that like maybe it's controversial for some business-wise, but in the grand scheme of things, I'd rather have someone be open, where they stand, and they let everyone else speak their mind, rather than someone where you don't know where they're standing and then they censor all opposing views regardless, because that's
it seems, I think the full, I agree, the full transparency approach I think will prevail, and the experiment, in my opinion, is going well so far. I know there's a few hiccups here and there, but I'm enjoying it. It's definitely beating my expectations. I'm just gonna tell everyone tomorrow will be the crazy COVID debate, so hopefully I don't fuck it up with another shit show, and it goes well, because it's a very tricky subject. Fauci, we didn't get Fauci yet. We didn't get Fauci.
But if we do get him,
hopefully we get him. That'll be sick.
Mario,
surrounded by PR people for sure.
I have a contact I can pass on to Mario.
Anyone that can, anyone in the audience, anyone in the panel, anyone that knows anybody that would be good to bring on the panel. You guys have already helped us a lot. That's why we're bringing all these speakers. But DM me, my team will look at it. I can connect with you personally. In this case, we already have more than enough doctors. The main person we want is Fauci or a similar person in other countries, people that make these decisions or at least advise the president on such decisions. So Fauci and others like him. Fauci's the US, there's others in Europe, etc. So yeah, ALX or Alex. I called you ALX before because we had another Alex. That's why I said ALX. But yeah, Alex, would be great to have that introduction. It goes to everybody in the audience, and everyone in the audience, pin tweet above. Set your reminders. It's going to be a 6 space tomorrow, and also the newsletter on top of my profile. We're going to kick it off again and sending like an overview of all the spaces we do every week, because there's just so much information and so many things going on. So we're going to start doing that in a week or so. So make sure you subscribe to that newsletter. We'll see you all tomorrow, and then on Thursday we're doing the crypto space, going through what happened with Sam, what's happening with Binance. And then on Friday, I guess, Ian, is the next drop, the Fauci files, do you know when it's going to start? Is it Friday or we don't know yet?
We don't know yet. We don't know yet.
I
It's probably
hope.
going to be the weekend.
I hope not, man. I need a break. But if it is the weekend, we'll see you. We'll see you all for the Fauci Files, and anyone listening. Whenever there's breaking news, that's when we'll be doing the space. When there's news that matters, and we have a 24/7 team that's watching it, and we immediately get the right panelists to have.
It's Time to Build by Marc Andreessen. You can also find and share this essay at a16z.com/build.
Every Western institution was unprepared for the coronavirus pandemic, despite many prior warnings. This monumental failure of institutional effectiveness will reverberate for the rest of the decade, but it's not too early to ask why and what we need to do about it. Many of us would like to pin the cause on one political party or another, on one government or another. But the harsh reality is that it all failed. No Western country or state or city was prepared. And despite hard work and often extraordinary sacrifice by many people within these institutions. So the problem runs deeper than your favorite political opponent or your home nation. Part of the problem is clearly foresight, a failure of imagination. But the other part of the problem is what we didn't do in advance and what we're failing to do now. And that is a failure of action, and specifically our widespread inability to build. We see this today with the things we urgently need but don't have. We don't have enough coronavirus tests or test materials, including, amazingly, cotton swabs and common reagents. We don't have enough ventilators, negative pressure rooms, and ICU beds. And we don't have enough surgical masks, eye shields, and medical gowns. As I write this, New York City has put out a desperate call for rain ponchos to be used as medical gowns. Rain ponchos in 2020 in America. We also don't have therapies or a vaccine, despite, again, years of advance warning about bat-borne coronaviruses. Our scientists will hopefully invent therapies and a vaccine, but then we may not have the manufacturing factories required to scale their production. And even then, we'll see if we can deploy therapies or a vaccine fast enough to matter. It took scientists 5 years to get regulatory testing approval for the new Ebola vaccine after that scourge's 2014 outbreak at the cost of many lives. In the US, we don't even have the ability to get federal bailout money to the people and businesses that need it. Tens of millions of laid-off workers and their families, and many millions of small businesses are in serious trouble right now. And we have no direct method to transfer them money without potentially disastrous delays. A government that collects money from all its citizens and businesses each year has never built a system to distribute money to us when it's needed most. Why do we not have these things? Medical equipment and financial conduits involve no rocket science whatsoever. At least therapies and vaccines are hard. Making masks and transferring money are not hard. We could have these things, but we chose not to. Specifically, we chose not to have the mechanisms, the factories, the systems to make these things. We chose not to build. You don't just see this smug complacency, the satisfaction with the status quo, and the unwillingness to build in the pandemic or in healthcare generally. You see it throughout Western life, and specifically throughout American life. You see it in housing, in the physical footprint of our cities. We can't build nearly enough housing in our cities with surging economic potential, which results in crazily skyrocketing housing prices in places like San Francisco, making it nearly impossible for regular people to move in and take the jobs of the future. We also can't build the cities themselves anymore. When the producers of HBO's Westworld wanted to portray the American city of the future, they didn't film in Seattle or Los Angeles or Austin. They went to Singapore. We should have gleaming skyscrapers and spectacular living environments in all our best cities at levels way beyond what we have now. Where are they? You see it in education. We have top-end universities, Yes, but with the capacity to teach only a microscopic percentage of the 4 million new 18-year-olds in the US each year, or the 120 million new 18-year-olds in the world each year. Why not educate every 18-year-old? Isn't that the most important thing we can possibly do? Why not build a far larger number of universities, or scale the ones we have way up? The last major innovation in K-12 education was Montessori, which traces back to the 1960s. We've been doing education research that's never reached practical deployment for 50 years since. Why not build a lot more great K-12 schools using everything we know now? We know one-to-one tutoring can reliably increase education outcomes by 2 standard deviations. The Bloom 2 sigma effect. We have the internet. Why haven't we built systems to match every young learner with an older tutor to dramatically improve student success? You see it in manufacturing. Contrary to conventional wisdom, American manufacturing output is higher than ever. But why has so much manufacturing been offshored to places with cheaper manual labor? We know how to build highly automated factories. We know the enormous number of higher paying jobs we would create to design and build and operate those factories. We know, and we're experiencing right now, the strategic problem of relying on offshore manufacturing of key goods. Why aren't we building Elon Musk's alien dreadnoughts, giant, gleaming, state-of-the-art factories producing every conceivable kind of product at the highest possible quality and lowest possible cost all throughout our country? You see it in transportation. Where are the supersonic aircraft? Where are the millions of delivery drones? Where are the high-speed trains, the soaring monorails, the hyperloops, and yes, the flying cars? Is the problem money? That seems hard to believe when we have the money to wage endless wars in the Middle East and repeatedly bail out incumbent banks, airlines, and car makers. The federal government just passed a $2 trillion coronavirus rescue package in 2 weeks. Is the problem capitalism? I'm with Nicholas Stern when he says that capitalism is how we take care of people we don't know. All of these fields are highly lucrative already and should be prime stomping grounds for capitalist investment. Good both for the investor and the customers who are served. Is the problem technical competence? Clearly not, or we wouldn't have the homes and skyscrapers, schools and hospitals, cars and trains, computers and smartphones that we already have. The problem is desire. We need to want these things. The problem is inertia. We need to want these things more than we want to prevent these things. The problem is regulatory capture. We need to want new companies to build these things, even if incumbents don't like it, even if only to force the incumbents to build these things. And the problem is will. We need to build these things. And we need to separate the imperative to build these things from ideology and politics. Both sides need to contribute to building. The right starts out in a more natural, albeit compromised, place. The right is generally pro-production, but is too often corrupted by forces that hold back market-based competition and the building of things. The right must fight hard against crony capitalism, regulatory capture, ossified oligopolies, risk-inducing offshoring, and investor-friendly buybacks in lieu of customer-friendly, and over a longer period of time, even more investor-friendly innovation. It's time for full-throated, unapologetic, uncompromised political support from the right for aggressive investment in new products, in new industries, in new factories, in new science, in big leaps forward. The left starts out with a stronger bias toward the public sector in many of these areas, to which I say, prove the superior model. Demonstrate that the public sector can build better hospitals, better schools, better transportation, better cities, better housing. Stop trying to protect the old, the entrenched, the irrelevant. Commit the public sector fully to the future. Milton Friedman once said, the great public sector mistake is to judge policies and programs by their intentions rather than their results. Instead of taking that as an insult, take it as a challenge. Build new things and show the results. Show that new models of public sector healthcare can be inexpensive and effective. How about starting with the VA? When the next coronavirus comes along, blow us away. Even private universities like Harvard are lavished with public funding. Why can't 100,000 or or 1 million students a year attend Harvard. Why shouldn't regulators and taxpayers demand that Harvard build? Solve the climate crisis by building. Energy experts say that all carbon-based electrical power generation on the planet could be replaced by a few thousand new zero-emission nuclear reactors. So let's build those. Maybe we can start with 10 new reactors, then 100, then the rest. In fact, I think building is how we reboot the American dream. The things we build in huge quantities, like computers and TVs, drop rapidly in price. The things we don't, like housing, schools, and hospitals, skyrocket in price. What's the American dream? The opportunity to have a home of your own and a family you can provide for. We need to break the rapidly escalating price curves for housing, education, and healthcare to make sure that every American can realize the dream. And the only way to do that is to build. Building isn't easy, or we'd already be doing all this. We need to demand more of our political leaders, of our CEOs, our entrepreneurs, our investors. We need to demand more of our culture, of our society, and we need to demand more from each other. We're all necessary, and we can all contribute to building. Every step of the way, to everyone around us, we should be asking the question, what are you building? What are you building directly, or helping other people to build, or teaching other people to build, or taking care of people who are building? If the work you're doing isn't either leading to something being built or taking care of people directly, we failed you, and we need to get you into a position, an occupation, a career where you can contribute to building. There are always outstanding people in even the most broken systems. We need to get all the talent we can on the biggest problems we have and on building the answers to these problems. I expect this essay to be the target of criticism. Here's a modest proposal to my critics. Instead of attacking my ideas of what to build, conceive your own. What do you think we should build? There's an excellent chance I'll agree with you. Our nation and our civilization were built on production, on building. Our forefathers and foremothers built roads and trains, farms and factories, then the computer, the microchip, the smartphone, and uncounted thousands of other things that we now take for granted that are all around us, that define our lives and provide for our well-being. There is only one way to honor their legacy and to create the future we want for our own children and grandchildren, and that's to build.